The Dark Reel, a horror tale at the Sundance Film Festival. Have you ever wondered what happens when your nightmares come to life? What if the very film you created, the one you poured your soul into, begins to slip beyond your control, haunting you in ways you never imagined? I can still hear the crunch of my boots on the snow-covered streets of Park City, Utah, the quiet hum of festival goers rushing from venue to venue. The air was sharp with the cold, but my heart was racing with excitement. This was my shot. The Sundance Film Festival, the place where filmmakers go to be discovered. My short film, Flicker, was selected for the Midnight category, a showcase of experimental horror. But what I didn't realize then was that this festival wasn't about films. It was about something far darker, and I was already caught in its grip. My name's Lily Daniels. I'm just a filmmaker struggling to make a name for myself. Flicker wasn't just a project, it was my life's work, a psychological horror born from the bizarre dreams that had plagued me since childhood. I wanted recognition. I wanted validation, but above all I wanted to escape the crushing weight of my anonymity. I checked into my hotel, a rundown motel on the edge of town. The concierge handed me the room key with a blank stare, his eyes avoiding mine. "It's tradition," he muttered when I asked why I wasn't placed closer to the festival center. Tradition. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something wasn't right. The motel was a nightmare. Musty, damp air clung to the room like a second skin. The wallpaper peeled in jagged strips, and the only lamp in the room flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows that twisted and danced on the walls. I tried to shake it off, but something gnawed at the pit of my stomach. I glanced out the window, and that's when I saw him. A man, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He stood perfectly still across the street as though waiting for something or someone. I stared at him, my pulse quickening until the lamp flickered again. When the light steadied, the man was gone. The festival was everything I had hoped for, but it wasn't right. There were screenings, parties, panels, but every so often I'd catch glimpses of him. In the reflection of a champagne flute, in the crowd during a panel discussion. Always there, always watching. And then came the night of my premiere. The lights dimmed. The projector whirred to life. But what played on the screen wasn't my film. It was my nightmares. Faces I didn't recognize, places I had never been. But they felt so familiar, like I had been there before, like I belonged there. I looked around at the audience, expecting the usual buzz, the murmurs of curiosity. But no, the room was dead silent. And when the film ended, the applause came, but it wasn't what I had imagined. The audience stood as one, clapping in eerie unison. Their faces were blank, empty. Their eyes devoid of life, as if they weren't even there. I rushed out of the theater, my heart pounding. Richard Kane, my mentor, my supposed savior, approached with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Brilliant work, Lily," he said, his voice flat, almost mechanical. I shook my head, still in shock. That wasn't my film. He leaned in and whispered something that sent chills through me. "It is now." The next few days were a blur. I tried to talk to the festival organizers, but they wouldn't listen. Everyone, even the other filmmakers, avoided my gaze. I was invisible. But then an invitation arrived. A private party for Midnight category filmmakers. An exclusive event held at an abandoned lodge on the outskirts of town. Something about it called to me. I should have said no. But I didn't. The lodge was wrong. Its windows were boarded up, and the snow outside looked as if it had been stained crimson under the flickering neon sign that read, "Welcome Midnight Creators." Inside, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of burnt celluloid. The other filmmakers sat in a circle, pale and silent, staring at the floor. In the center of the room was an old film reel, spinning on a projector that wasn't even plugged in. "Sit," Richard's voice commanded. I obeyed, though my legs felt like lead. As the reel began to play, the room was bathed in a sickly, eerie glow. On the screen, my life, my real life, every secret, every moment I had buried, projected for all to see. I watched in horror as figures in the shadows began to twist and move, their eyes hollow, empty. They whispered my name, their voices like rustling leaves echoing inside my mind. "You've joined the reel," Richard's voice echoed. "Your work will live forever, and so will you in pieces." And then, just as quickly as it all began, the lodge was gone. The snow, the shadows, Richard, all of it vanished. I found myself back at the festival, standing among the bustling crowd. But something was horribly wrong. The faces around me were the same, but their expressions were twisted into grotesque smiles. I looked down at my hand, which was gripping a ticket to a screening of Flicker. The tagline beneath it read, "A Lily Daniels original, a story that never ends." I tried to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. My voice was gone. Now I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I'm trapped in my own creation, or if the reel has taken me somewhere I'll never escape. But one thing is certain. This story is far from over, and neither am I. I just hope someone, anyone, will remember my name before it's too late. The Sinulog Curse, a chilling tale of faith and fear. The streets of Cebu City were alive with vibrant colors, the rhythmic thumping of drums and the euphoric chants of Pit Senor. As the Sinulog festival hit its peak, the air was thick with excitement, the crowd dancing, celebrating, praying. I'd come here on assignment, a freelance journalist tasked with capturing the essence of one of the Philippines' most celebrated religious events. But I wasn't here for the joy or the faith. No, I was here to uncover a dark secret, an old legend whispered among the locals. A curse, they said, one that haunts outsiders who dare disrespect the sacredness of Sinulog. I thought it was just a myth, something to scare tourists. That was until the shadows began to follow me. This is Mara Reyes. I'm a journalist with a penchant for chasing urban legends, for finding the chilling, the unexplained and the terrifying. My editor had insisted I cover this Sinulog curse, a so-called punishment for anyone who mocks the Santo Niño or the festival itself. I didn't believe in curses, no, but a good story, that I could never resist. At first, everything seemed perfect. The parades were full of color, the dancers moved like living fire, and the smell of lechon filled the air. This was what I came for. But underneath it all there was something else, something unspoken. A weight in the air, like the city itself was holding its breath, watching me. The locals were friendly but guarded when I asked about the curse. "It's not a joke," one elderly vendor warned me, her voice trembling. "Some things should be left alone." On my second night, I attended a street dance competition. The humidity wrapped itself around me like a suffocating blanket, the flickering lanterns casting long, trembling shadows on the pavement. The music pulsed in the air, but there was a presence there, something watching, something lurking. As I scanned the dancers through my lens, I saw her. A woman, dressed in traditional costume, her face obscured by a mask, her movements unnervingly fluid. Too fluid, almost hypnotic. I lifted my camera to capture the moment, but when I looked through the lens, she was gone. The crowd's cheers faded into a dull murmur, muffled like I was hearing them from underwater. A shiver crawled down my spine. I turned to leave, my heart pounding, but when I did, there she was, standing directly behind me. Her eyes, hidden behind the mask, seemed to burn into my soul. The next day the strangeness continued. I returned to my hotel and the smell of incense and candle wax lingered in the room, despite not having lit anything. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, and at night whispers, faint, undistinguishable, they echoed in a language I didn't recognize. My camera malfunctioned, the images on the screen warping into distorted, blurry shots of the masked dancer. I knew I needed answers, so I sought out the elderly vendor again. When I described the dancer to her, her face drained of color. "That's not a person," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's her, the keeper of the curse. You've insulted the festival. You've sought to exploit what should never be exploited." That night I forced myself to attend the grand procession, determined to finish my assignment and leave Cebu with a story to tell. Thousands of devotees walked the streets, each carrying a candle, their flames flickering like a river of light. But amidst the reverence I saw her again, the dancer, standing at the edge of the procession, her mask catching the candlelight, her presence unsettling in the sea of believers. As the procession moved forward, she didn't walk. She glided, her feet never touching the ground. I tried to blend in with the crowd, to escape her gaze, but no matter how far I went, she was always closer. The chants of Pit Señor twisted and warped in the air, becoming something darker, more sinister, in sync with my frenzied heartbeat. I tripped, falling into the gutter, and when I looked up, she was there, towering over me. Her mask cracked, and through the jagged hole I saw her eyes, hollow, black, empty, and behind them something inhuman, something ancient. "Leave," she hissed, her voice echoed in my skull. "You do not belong here." I ran, heart pounding in my chest, stumbling back to my hotel room. But even there I wasn't safe. The walls seemed to close in. The air, thick with smoke and heat, suffocated me. My laptop screen glowed faintly, an unfinished draft of my article still open, and then I saw her reflection. On the screen. Her hollow eyes stared directly at me, and her fingers, her cold, skeletal fingers, reached out from the screen, curling around my throat. I gasped for air, my vision blurring, struggling to breathe, and in a panic I screamed, "I'm sorry." With a deafening crack, the lights went out, plunging me into darkness. I woke up on the street, disoriented, the festival still raging around me. The music, the chanting, the lights, they all seemed so far away, as if I was no longer part of it. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. I reached for my camera, but it wasn't there. Instead, a small, intricately carved mask lay in its place, the same mask the dancer had worn, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't just a spectator anymore, I had become part of it. A silent, forgotten part of the festival, caught in its eternal cycle. And somewhere in the crowd, someone else was taking my place. Shadow beneath the bonfire, a Makar Sankranti horror. The flames crackled, throwing flickering light on the crowd. Smoke curled into the winter night, carrying the sweet scent of sesame and jaggery. It was Makar Sankranti, a celebration of light, life, and the sun's return. But standing on the edge of the crowd, I felt none of that warmth. Instead, I felt it watching me. A figure just outside the glow of the bonfire, its eyes reflecting the flames. "Don't stray too far from the fire," an old woman murmured, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "The night belongs to the shadows. My name is Aaron. I didn't belong in this village, not anymore. I was a city kid, too used to the hum of electricity and the glow of skyscrapers to take superstitions seriously. But when my father died suddenly, I had no choice but to return to this place. our ancestral home, to settle his affairs. The villagers greeted me with uneasy smiles and wary eyes, their hands lingering on mine just a moment too long. They spoke of the Heya, a shadow that walks during Sankranti. It feeds on those who stray too far from the bonfires, they said. I laughed it off, chalking it up to old stories meant to scare children, until the first night. The village was alive with celebration. Bright kites painted the sky, drums echoed through the air, and children ran laughing with sugarcane in hand. Everywhere bonfires blazed, a symbol of light chasing away the darkness. But as night fell, the laughter felt forced and the kites were abandoned. Villagers huddled close to the fires, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Beyond the light, the shadows seemed to deepen, stretching unnaturally long. When I stepped away just for a moment, I felt it. A cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Only the wind, or so I told myself. That night, unable to sleep, I found my father's old diary buried in a trunk. His handwriting was hurried, frantic. Most of it didn't make sense. Disjointed entries about feeding the fire and paying the debt. But one passage was underlined so heavily it tore the page. The Heya comes every year. It feeds on the careless, the disrespectful. Never let the fire die. I wanted to dismiss it, but the memories came rushing back. As a child, I remembered my father's obsession with the Sankranti bonfires. He'd stay up all night, feeding them grain and ghee, muttering prayers under his breath. Now the bonfire in our yard felt weak, its embers barely glowing. And when I looked out the window, I saw it again. A shadow taller than a man, its form rippling like smoke. The villagers refused to talk about it. "Keep the fire alive and you'll be fine," they said, their eyes darting to the darkened corners of the room. That night the village was silent. Even the drums had stopped. The bonfires blazed brighter than ever, but the shadows danced at their edges, alive and hungry. I stayed by the fire, but my exhaustion got the better of me. When I woke, the flames were low and the room was ice cold. It was there, not a person, not an animal. A thing, its form shifting and twisting, its eyes two burning voids. "Why didn't you feed the fire?" it whispered, its voice dry and hollow like leaves crushed underfoot. I ran out into the village, clutching a stick from the dying fire. The central bonfire blazed in the square, a beacon of safety. Behind me the Heya followed, its form stretching, crawling, growing. It was faster than I thought, its growls low and guttural, shaking the ground beneath my feet. I reached the bonfire and threw myself into its light, the shadow screeching as it touched the flames. Its form dissolved into tendrils of smoke, vanishing into the night, but the villagers didn't cheer. They stared at me, their faces pale. I thought I had won, that the Heya was gone, but now, sitting by the fire, I can feel it. A cold, gnawing presence deep inside me. The villagers keep their distance. They don't speak to me, but their whispers are louder than words. Don't let the fire die. But I already know it's too late, because the shadow isn't gone, it's waiting. And this time it's inside me. Carnival of Shadows, the terrifying secrets behind Carnival. I arrived in Wolfsheim on a damp, overcast evening, the sky smeared with bruised shades of grey and purple. The train hissed to a halt, its metallic groan blending with the eerie silence that cloaked the small town. Even before stepping off the platform, I felt it, a subtle, oppressive heaviness in the air, as though the town itself were holding its breath. The scent of rain-soaked earth mingled with the faint tang of something metallic. I tightened my grip on my leather satchel. my fingers brushing against the frayed edges of my brother Felix's photo inside. His smile stared back at me, frozen in time, reminding me why I was here. He vanished during last year's carnival, and I refused to let his memory fade into whispered rumors and hollow condolences. No, I needed answers. Wolfsheim's streets were unnervingly quiet for a town about to host a festival. The cobblestones gleamed wetly under the dim streetlights, casting warped reflections. As I walked, I noticed shop windows dressed with vibrant masks and costumes, their cheerful designs unable to mask an underlying unease. A sign in bold Gothic script read, "Carnival begins tomorrow. Revelry awaits." The words felt like a taunt. By the following night, the transformation was complete. The streets had erupted into chaos and color. Laughter and music spilled into the air, but there was a dissonance to it, like a merry tune played a fraction out of key. My senses were assaulted by the smells of sweet, sugary confections mingled with the acrid tang of alcohol, and something else I couldn't place, an iron-like scent that made my stomach churn. Masked figures swirled around me, their laughter sharp and edged with malice. I felt like an intruder, an uninvited guest at an elaborate masquerade. The masks themselves were grotesque, their designs intricate but unsettling. Wide, frozen grins, hollow eyes that seemed to follow me as I moved. Every so often, one of the revelers would pause too long, their masked face tilted toward me as though they recognized me. But when I met their gaze, they turned away, dissolving back into the throng. The carousel, once a symbol of childhood innocence, stood at the center of the square, its painted horses glinting under flickering lights. The creaking of the ride, slow and rhythmic, was hypnotic. I found myself drawn to it, my pulse quickening with every step closer. But then I saw it. The horses weren't empty. Masked figures sat rigidly upon them, unmoving, their hollow eyes fixed forward. A shiver ran down my spine and I backed away. As I wandered deeper into the carnival, the air grew heavier, as if charged with an unseen force. The laughter and music faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. It was then I found the first clue, an old journal half buried in the dirt near a tattered tent. The leather cover was cracked and the pages smelled of mildew, but the writing inside was still legible. The entries told of a man's descent into paranoia during carnival, his words becoming more frantic with each page. The masks, they watch me. They whisper my name. I saw my reflection in the hall of mirrors, but it wasn't me staring back. It knows I'm trying to leave. The final entry was smeared as though written in haste. Asterisk asterisk, the carnival never lets you leave. A chill swept through me as I closed the journal, its weight suddenly unbearable. The shadows around me seemed to lengthen, shifting in ways that defied the dim light. For a moment I thought I heard Felix's voice, soft, calling my name. "Lena." I spun around, my heart hammering, but there was no one there. Only the flickering lights and the faint, taunting echoes of laughter. My search led me to a sprawling maze of tents and stalls that seemed to pulse with life. Every path I took seemed to loop back on itself, the carnival's layout shifting like a living thing. I stumbled upon a fortune teller's tent, its entrance draped with faded red fabric. Against my better judgment, I entered. The interior was dimly lit by a single flickering candle. A figure sat at the table, their face obscured by a porcelain mask painted with an eternal smile. They gestured for me to sit without a word. Reluctantly I did. The masked figure produced a deck of cards, their movements slow and deliberate. The first card they flipped over made my blood run cold. The Hanged Man. "You seek answers," they said, their voice distorted as though layered with others. "But answers have a cost. Before I could respond, they flipped another card, the devil. Beware the carnival's heart. It beats for you now. The candle extinguished, plunging the tent into darkness. When I stumbled outside, the carnival seemed different. The music was louder, more chaotic, and the laughter had turned into guttural, animalistic sounds. The air felt thick, suffocating, and my own reflection in a nearby mirror startled me. My face was pale, my eyes wide with terror, but there was something else. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a mask beginning to form over my features. Eventually, I found myself standing before the grand tent at the carnival's center. Its entrance yawned like a monstrous mouth, beckoning me inside. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't. Felix was here. I could feel it. Inside, the air was cold and damp, and the walls of the tent seemed to breathe. The space was vast, far larger than it should have been, and at its center stood a figure in a towering mask adorned with golden horns and intricate carvings, the ringmaster. "Welcome, Lena," they said, their voice echoing unnaturally. "You've come so far. Are you ready to join us?" Behind them I saw him, Felix. He was shackled to a pillar, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Let him go," I demanded, my voice trembling. The ringmaster tilted their head as if amused. "He's already part of the carnival, as you soon will be." The lights dimmed, and the masked figures began to close in around me, their movements synchronized like a grotesque dance. The air grew heavier, suffused with the scent of blood and decay. My vision blurred, and the last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Felix mouthing two words: "I'm sorry." When I woke, the carnival was gone. The town square was empty, silent except for the rustling of leaves in the cold morning wind. I touched my face, relieved to feel my own skin. But when I looked into a shattered mirror lying on the ground, my reflection stared back with hollow eyes and a frozen, painted smile. I was the carnival now. Echoes of the banjo, a haunting at the Tamworth Country Music Festival. I always loved the Tamworth Country Music Festival. Its charm wasn't just in the music. It was in the shared laughter, the camaraderie of strangers, and the echo of banjos that seemed to linger in the air long after the final note was played. This year, though, something felt different. Maybe it was because I'd come here alone, or maybe it was because of the local tale I'd overheard on my first night, about a performer who never left the festival grounds. They called him the Banished Banjo Man. My name is Cassie Harper. I'm a struggling musician, and this year's festival was my last shot at making something of myself. My father, a country music legend, had once graced these very stages, but his shadow loomed large over me. I arrived with my battered guitar, a handful of songs, and a desperate hope that someone, anyone, would notice me. The festival grounds buzzed with music and laughter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At first I chalked it up to nerves. After all, I was here to perform, to bare my soul to an audience. But when I started hearing the faint plucking of a banjo, always when I was alone, that's when I knew something wasn't right. Tamworth at night was a different beast. Neon lights flickered against the darkness. The scent of barbecue mingled with the sharp tang of spilled beer, and the distant hum of country ballads gave the streets a dreamlike quality. One evening, I wandered into an empty alley behind the main stage, looking for a quiet place to practice. That's when I saw him. A man sat on an overturned crate, his face obscured by the brim of a cowboy hat. His fingers danced over the strings of a weathered banjo, producing a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine. "Beautiful tune," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond. Instead, he looked up and I saw that his eyes weren't quite right. They shimmered as though filled with static, and his face was unnaturally pale, almost translucent. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. When I looked again, he was gone, but the melody lingered, faint and eerie in the stillness of the night. The encounters grew more frequent. The melody followed me wherever I went, through the crowded festival streets, in the quiet of my hotel room, even during my performance. I asked a few locals about the man. Most laughed it off, calling it an old ghost story. But one woman, a grizzled bartender with a voice like gravel, leaned in close and whispered, "You've seen him, haven't you? The banished banjo man." She told me the story. Decades ago, a musician had been banned from the festival after a violent altercation with another performer. Devastated, he vowed to return every year, dead or alive, to play his music. "They say he targets the ones who remind him of himself," she added, her gaze piercing. "Ambitious, desperate, alone." That night the melody grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't sleep, so I took my guitar and wandered back to the alley where I'd first seen him. He was waiting for me. This time he spoke. "Play me a song," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like wind through dead leaves. I hesitated, but began to strum the chords of one of my songs. He watched, unmoving, as I poured my heart into the performance. When I finished, he nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "You've got talent," he said. "But talent isn't enough. Are you willing to pay the price?" "What price?" I asked, my voice trembling. He smiled, and for a moment his face warped, his features twisting into something inhuman. "Your soul," he whispered. The banjo music erupted, loud and deafening, drowning out all other sounds. The alley twisted around me, the walls seeming to close in as the world dissolved into a swirling vortex of sound and shadow. I ran, clutching my guitar, but no matter where I turned, he was there, plucking the strings of his banjo, the melody driving me to the brink of madness. "Play," he commanded, his voice echoing in my skull. "Play for me or be forgotten." With trembling hands I began to strum, matching his tempo, his rhythm. The air grew heavy, the ground trembling beneath me. It felt like an eternity, but finally the banjo fell silent. When I looked up, he was gone. The next morning I woke up in the middle of the festival grounds, my guitar lying beside me. People passed by without a second glance, as though I were invisible. I tried to speak, to call out, but no sound came. I grabbed a stranger's arm, but they walked right through me. That's when I heard it, the faint plucking of a banjo, and I knew I hadn't escaped. I had joined him. The haunting of Cape Town minstrels, a carnival of shadows. I could feel the drumbeats echoing through my chest as I stepped into the heart of Cape Town's minstrel carnival. The air was thick with excitement, the smell of street food hanging in the warm summer breeze. But as the parade began, something strange stirred beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite place. Something that felt wrong. I've danced in the carnival since I could walk. It's part of my family's legacy, something I've always been proud of, until now. I'm 25, and for the first time I'm finally performing solo. I should have been excited, but as I stood there ready to step into the street, my stomach twisted in a way I couldn't ignore. The rhythm of the drums, the cheers from the crowd, everything felt off, but I pushed it aside. I had a job to do. As I danced, the world around me blurred, the sea of colorful costumes swirling. The colors, the glitter, the lights, they all danced with me. But then, something strange happened. A jolt, a shiver up my spine. I couldn't control my body anymore. My legs moved in unnatural ways, jerking, almost as if something else was pulling the strings. The crowd thought it was part of the performance, but I could feel it. Something was wrong. The curse had begun. The atmosphere shifts. The vibrant lights started flickering, casting distorted shadows on the streets. The carnival music twisted into a broken melody, sharp and discordant, like the strings of a violin snapping one by one. The crowd's voices faded, replaced by something deeper, something darker. I could smell it now, rotting flowers, something metallic in the air like blood. The joyous carnival that should have lifted my spirits had turned into something else, something suffocating. The dancers around me, they weren't moving right either. Their faces blank, their bodies jerking as though they too were controlled by invisible hands. I didn't want to believe it, but my mind was screaming. This wasn't part of the show. I tried to push through, but the deeper I went, the more it felt like the carnival was consuming me, pulling me deeper into its twisted dance. As the parade continued, something in the crowd began to shift. The performers were losing control. One collapsed mid-spin. Another dropped her instrument, her fingers twitching unnaturally as if her body wasn't hers. Panic set in. Whispers danced around me. It's the curse. I had heard the stories. The curse of the minstrels had been whispered about for generations, but I thought it was just a myth, a legend to scare children. But now it was real, and I was next. As I danced, my mind fractured. The music seemed to pull at something deep inside me, something I had buried long ago. My heart raced, sweat dripping down my forehead. Then, through the crowd, I saw her. My friend. Or was it? Her face, twisted with pain, stared at me from the corner of my eye. The same face from the accident years ago, the one I tried to forget. The guilt hit me like a punch to the gut. The curse was digging into my past, pulling out the darkest parts of me, making me relive the accident that tore my life apart. My friend lying broken and bruised, her life ruined because of my careless mistake. It wasn't just the crowd that was haunted. It was me. The curse was feeding off my guilt, my trauma. The faces of the dancers around me, they weren't their own. They distorted, shifting into grotesque versions of their former selves, their eyes vacant. The lines between reality and the curse began to blur. The streets of Cape Town warped, twisting into endless roads that led nowhere. The sky darkened, the sun no longer shining. I was trapped. And then the voices came. Join us. Embrace your guilt. They weren't just the whispers of the past. They were part of the curse pulling me under. I could feel myself slipping, my body and mind becoming part of the twisted parade. I had no choice. I couldn't escape. The curse had its claws in me, digging deeper. The music turned to screams. The dancers, now hollow shells, surrounded me. I could hear the sounds of my friend's voice calling me from the crowd. She wasn't in the crowd. She was inside my head, and in that moment I understood. The only way to break free was to confront what I had been running from, my guilt. I had to face the truth, to embrace it. Only then could the curse be broken. But I didn't realize the cost. I stood at the center of the chaos, my heart pounding, my body trembling. The street was alive with shadows, the once vibrant carnival now a blood-soaked nightmare. The curse had turned everything to madness, and I had to make the choice, sacrifice myself, let my guilt consume me entirely, or allow the curse to consume everyone. I let go. I let the guilt swallow me whole, and in that moment the carnival's grip seemed to loosen. The curse vanished, or so I thought. The next year I was back. As the carnival resumed, I danced once more, but this time I wasn't free. My face was hollow, my movements mechanical. I was just another puppet in the twisted performance, and the curse, it was never truly broken. I'm still here, trapped in the cycle. The minstrel carnival never stops, and neither does the curse. Shadows in the ATI Atihan festival, the drumbeats vibrated through my chest, their rhythm raw and primal, pulling me deeper into the heart of the crowd. The humid air clung to my skin, heavy with the mingling scents of incense, sweat, and roasted meat. Everywhere I turned, painted faces smiled, bright, grotesque grins frozen beneath flickering streetlights. The ATI Atihan festival was supposed to be a celebration of life and heritage, but something wasn't right. I felt it in the shadows, darting just out of sight. In the way the drumming seemed to grow louder and louder, pounding in my ears, and in the cryptic words of an old man who grabbed my arm as I passed, "You shouldn't be here. This isn't your place." I should have listened. My name is Maya Garcia, and I came to Calibo to prove myself. As a journalist, I needed a story that would stand out, something vibrant and unforgettable. The ATI Atihan festival seemed perfect, a celebration of Filipino culture, full of color, music, and history. But I wasn't just here for the article. I'd grown up disconnected from my heritage, my parents' stories fading into the background of city life. Coming here felt like a chance to bridge that gap, to find a piece of myself I'd long ignored. I didn't expect to find fear instead. The moment I arrived, something felt off. The festival was alive, but the energy was strange, almost too eager. Drums echoed through the narrow streets, their rhythm too intense, too demanding. The painted faces of the dancers gleamed under the streetlights, their smiles too wide, their eyes too sharp. And then there were the whispers. Quiet at first, growing louder as I wandered deeper into the festivities. I couldn't catch the words, but I could feel the weight of them, like a warning I didn't yet understand. I spent the day taking notes and snapping photos, trying to focus on the story. But my camera kept malfunctioning. Images blurred, streaked with shadows that shouldn't have been there. The people were welcoming enough, but there was something in their eyes, something they were hiding. When I asked about the festival's history, their smiles faltered. They deflected with jokes or changed the subject entirely. As the sun set, the festival's energy shifted. The drumming grew louder, the painted faces more surreal in the flickering torchlight. I felt a strange pressure, like the very air was pushing me closer to the dancers, closer to the rhythm. And then I saw it. A figure in the crowd, its face obscured by shadows. It didn't move with the dancers, but stood perfectly still, watching me. When I turned to look, it was gone. That night I couldn't sleep. The drumming continued, relentless, seeping into my dreams. I woke in a sweat, convinced I wasn't alone. My instincts told me to leave, but my pride wouldn't let me. I couldn't go back to Manila empty-handed. I needed the story, even if it meant digging into the darker corners of the festival's history. I spoke to an elderly man who'd been sitting by the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he told me the story. The ATI made a pact long ago, he said. A desperate promise to an ancient spirit. Every year we honor that pact to keep the spirit at bay. But the dance isn't just for celebration, it's a ritual, a sacrifice. I laughed nervously, brushing it off as folklore. But his gaze didn't waver. You should leave, he said, before it finds you. The final night of the festival was chaos. The drumming was deafening, the dancers frenzied, their movements almost inhuman. I pushed through the crowd, my camera clutched tightly in my hands, but every photo I took was wrong. Faces blurred, shadows stretched unnaturally long, and then I saw it again. The figure, closer this time, Its painted face was grotesque, the smile too wide, the eyes too dark. It moved toward me, the crowd parting as if they didn't see it. My chest tightened as I stumbled backward, the drumming growing louder, faster, until it drowned out everything else. It was inside my head, calling my name. I tried to run, but the crowd pushed me forward into the center of the procession. The dancers surrounded me, their painted faces twisting, their movements jerky and unnatural. The figure stepped forward, towering over me now. Its voice was a whisper and a roar at once. You were always meant to return. I fell to my knees, the drumming pounding in my skull. My vision blurred, the world spinning as the shadows closed in. When I woke, the festival was over. The streets were empty, the torches extinguished. My camera lay beside me, its memory wiped clean, but something had changed. My reflection in a nearby window wasn't mine anymore. My face was painted, my eyes too wide, my smile too sharp. I can still hear the drumming. It's inside me now, a rhythm I can't escape, and I know the festival isn't over, because this time I'm part of it. Dark ritual of the harvest plough Monday. I should have known something was wrong the moment I arrived in Greenshire. There was a stillness in the air, like the entire village was holding its breath. The cobblestones felt uneven under my boots, like they were shifting ever so slightly, and the field stretched out in all directions. Too vast, too quiet. I moved here for peace, to escape my own ghosts. But now I realized the ghosts weren't following me. I was walking straight into theirs. They call it Plough Monday, the celebration of a new agricultural year. I'd never heard of it before, but everyone here talked about it with reverence, and something else. Fear. That's when I first heard the whispers. My name is Alice Turner. I'm a writer, or at least I used to be before my life unraveled. Moving to Greenshire was supposed to be a fresh start. It's a quaint village, tucked away in the countryside, the kind of place where time seems to stand still. The locals were polite but distant, always watching. When they spoke about Plough Monday, their words were heavy with tradition. They asked me if I'd be attending the festival. I nodded, thinking it was just another quaint celebration. But that night, lying awake in my rented cottage, I heard something outside my window. A low, rhythmic hum like chanting carried by the wind. I convinced myself it was nothing, just my imagination. The days leading up to Plough Monday were unnerving. The fields surrounding the village seemed alive, the crops swaying even when there was no breeze. The scent of damp earth and decay clung to the air. I started noticing things, subtle, easy to dismiss things. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, shadows stretching longer than they should. The villagers seemed different too, their smiles strained, their eyes dark and hollow. In the attic of my cottage I found a leather-bound journal. It belonged to someone named Margaret, and it was filled with strange entries about Plough Monday. One passage stood out. The land demands its price. We all pay sooner or later. The festival began with a procession through the village. Lanterns lit the cobblestone streets, casting flickering light on the ancient buildings. The villagers wore traditional clothing, their faces painted with symbols I didn't recognize. I followed them to the church, a towering stone structure with an oppressive presence. Inside, the air was thick, almost suffocating. The altar was decorated with wheat stalks and a crude effigy of a man made from straw. I tried to leave, but the villagers closed ranks around me, their polite smiles now twisted with something else. "Stay," one of them whispered, their voice cold and sharp. "You're part of this now." I pieced it together too late. The land wasn't just soil and crops, it was alive, ancient and hungry. Margaret's journal spoke of a pact, one made centuries ago to ensure the village's prosperity. The effigy wasn't just a decoration. It was a vessel, and the ritual wasn't a celebration. It was a sacrifice, the whispers I'd been hearing. They weren't just in my head. They were the voices of those who'd been taken before me, their souls bound to the land. As the villagers began their chant, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The shadows in the room grew darker, deeper. The effigy's head turned, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. They dragged me to the altar, their hands cold and unyielding. I struggled, but it was useless. The whispers turned into screams as the ground cracked open, revealing a chasm of darkness below. From the void emerged a figure, twisted and skeletal, its form constantly shifting. This was the harvest god, the ancient force that demanded its due. "Give yourself," it whispered, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "The land must live." Tears streamed down my face as the villagers chanted louder, their eyes glazed over. I could feel the ground pulling me in, the darkness wrapping around my ankles. When I woke up, I was lying in my bed, my body trembling, my skin cold to the touch. I thought it had been a nightmare, but when I looked in the mirror I saw the marks, the dark, branching veins creeping up my neck like roots. Outside, the fields were greener than ever, the crops tall and thriving. The villagers greeted me that morning with warm smiles, thanking me for joining their tradition. And in the reflection of their eyes I saw it, the shadow of the harvest god watching. I wasn't free. I was part of the land now, just another sacrifice to keep the cycle going. And next year, when Plough Monday comes again, the whispers will call for someone else. The Drakenigstag curse, a haunting epiphany. The fog has rolled in again. It feels different this year. I thought I could escape it, but the past is calling me back. There's no place left to hide. On Drakenigstag, the ancient curse of Gablebark claims another soul, and this time it's mine. The wind whispers through the trees, pulling at my jacket, but it's the chill on my skin that sends a tremor down my spine. Something's wrong. It's Drakenigstag, Epiphany, the day of the 3 wise men, a celebration, or so they say. But here in this forgotten village, it's nothing but death and despair. I came back to Gablebark seeking answers, thinking I could finally make peace with my past. But what I've found isn't the closure I imagined. No, it's something much darker. Something I wish I could escape, but it's already too late. The traveler is here. Just call me Mirror, and I've been running from this place for years. I left when I was just a teenager, haunted by the memory of my family's name stained by death. The village of Gablebark is shrouded in secrecy, where the stories of the dead are never spoken aloud, only whispered in the wind carried by the trees. I swore I'd never come back, but the grief, the nightmares, they've been clawing at me, dragging me back here to face the truth of what happened. The truth that my father, an occultist obsessed with the unseen, spoke of a curse before he died. I didn't understand it then, but now I do. The village is empty, silent, the kind of silence that presses down on you like a weight. The fog hangs thick around the stone houses, and the smell of wet earth and pine needles clings to the air. But there's something else. A faint ringing of bells in the distance, and it's not the sound of celebration. It's the tolling of the cursed clock tower, silent for years until now. I walk through the village, the air growing colder with every step. The abandoned church looms ahead, its crumbling walls hiding more than just the past. I should have turned back, but curiosity, no guilt, compelled me forward. Inside, dust coats everything, the smell of decay filling my nostrils. The silence is suffocating, broken only by the soft creak of the stone floors beneath my feet. Then I hear it. The flicker of a candle, casting long shadows across the walls. A sudden chill wraps around me like something is standing just out of view. I can feel it, the presence of something, someone watching me from the corners of my mind. That's when I see him. He's standing at the altar, his back turned to me, his coat tattered and worn. I can't see his face, only the glow of an old-fashioned lantern that swings slowly in his hand. His presence is suffocating. The air grows heavier and the temperature plummets. I try to speak, but my voice feels trapped in my throat. He turns slowly and I feel my heart stop. "You've come to understand, haven't you?" The traveler's voice is a rasp, a whisper in the wind. The epiphany you seek isn't one of freedom but of truth, and the truth is there's no escape. His words wrap around me like chains, dragging me into the past I fled from. He knows about my family, about my father's involvement in the curse. But it's not just my father's sins that he wants me to confront. It's my own. Every night it gets worse. The fog thickens. The village twists and warps. I see visions of people long dead, faces I thought I had forgotten. But they are here, walking the streets like ghosts. I try to escape, but I can't. I'm trapped in this nightmare. The traveler is always just out of reach, a shadow at the edge of my vision, leaving cryptic messages that only serve to deepen the darkness in my mind. I wake up in strange places, places I don't remember going. There are symbols drawn in the dirt around me, cryptic markings that speak of ancient rituals. I see my reflection in puddles of water, but it's not me staring back. It's someone else, someone I don't recognize. The traveler's voice is always there in the corners of my mind, taunting me, offering truth that feels more like a sentence. Each answer I uncover leads to more questions. Every step I take into the past feels like I'm walking deeper into a trap. The village clock strikes midnight. The traveler is waiting for me in the church. The air is thick, suffocating. And that's when it hits me. My family didn't just participate in the curse, they created it. My father was the first to be chosen, the first victim, and now it's my turn to pay the price. "You're the final piece," the traveler whispers, his face still obscured by the shadow of his hood. "The epiphany is not a gift, it's the beginning of your descent." I try to fight back. I try to shatter the lantern, to burn away the curse, but the darkness fights back. The church shakes, the walls closing in on me. The traveler's grip tightens. I can feel the curse wrapping around my soul, pulling me deeper, dragging me into the abyss. I make a desperate choice. I burn the lantern. The flames consume it, and for a brief moment I think I've won. But the world doesn't change. It stays the same, twisted, broken. I stumble outside, gasping for air. The village is still silent. But then I see it. My reflection in a passing carriage mirror. It's not my face. The curse has passed to me. The traveler's eyes glint from the shadows as he whispers one last thing, his voice colder than the wind around me. The curse never ends. It only moves on. And now it's my turn to find a new victim. I never should have come back. I thought I could escape the curse, but now I know the truth. The epiphany is just the beginning. The haunting flame of Eerie, a Viking horror. The air smelled of salt, kerosene, and something else, something older. The torchlight parade snaked through the dark streets of Lerwick, casting flickering shadows on the snow-covered cobblestones beneath my feet. It was supposed to be a celebration, Eerie, Shetland's Viking fire festival, a night of roaring flames and boisterous cheers. But as the firelight danced, I saw something no one else seemed to notice. A figure, alone, standing on the fringe of the crowd, its hollow eyes reflecting the fire, its shadow stretching far longer than it should. No Viking costume, no torch, just watching. I should have walked away. But the more I looked, the more I felt myself drawn to it, as if it were pulling me in, like a moth to a flame. My name is Lauren Carter, and if you've ever heard of me, it's probably for my work documenting the eerie, the strange, the stories that lurk just beneath the surface of normal life. This year I was here to cover up Eerie, a festival steeped in Viking tradition, a night of fire and fury where the town becomes a living, breathing Viking saga. I thought it would be easy. Beautiful costumes, the roaring fire, the laughter echoing through the streets. But there was an undercurrent to the night, a tension that only seemed to grow the longer I stayed. I'd been interviewing the locals all day. They were kind enough, but there was something in their eyes when they spoke of the festival. "Stick to the main event," one old man told me, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Don't follow the torches past the fjord." I didn't understand it then, but I would. The fire, the drums, the laughter, all of it roared around me, an intoxicating rhythm that made the air feel alive. Hundreds of geysers marched, their torches lighting the streets like rivers of flame. Viking helmets gleamed in the firelight. Shouts and cheers filled the night, and I couldn't help but feel a part of something much bigger than myself. But the deeper I ventured into the night, the more the festival began to distort. The warmth from the flames seemed to fade. The heat in my skin cooled, replaced by an icy chill creeping in from nowhere. And then the sounds began to change. The cheers turned muffled, distant, as though I were hearing them from underwater. My heart rate picked up and I turned toward the fjord, hoping to find some peace in the silence. That's when I saw it. The second longship. It wasn't part of the festival. It was smaller, older, its weathered hull half hidden by the fog. The firelight flickered off it, but the glow didn't seem to touch the ship itself. I wasn't the only one who noticed, but it felt like I was. No one else seemed to be looking. The festival's chaos continued around me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the ship. Something was wrong. I walked closer, my boots crunching against the ice as I moved toward the ship, my camera clutched in my hand. The mist thickened, wrapping around me like a shroud. The sounds of the festival grew quieter, and soon all I could hear was the eerie drip of water and the slow, steady rhythm of my own breath. A figure emerged from the fog, a man draped in a tattered cloak. His skin was pale, unnaturally pale like moonlight. His eyes were wide with fear. "Turn back," he hissed, his voice trembling. "They'll take you too." Before I could respond, he vanished, disappearing into the mist as quickly as he'd appeared. I stood frozen for a moment, but my legs carried me forward as if the ship was calling to me. The second longship was closer now. I could see strange runes carved into its sides, faintly glowing in the mist. A dim light flickered from within, and without thinking I climbed aboard. The moment my feet hit the deck, I felt it. The air was thick, heavy, laden with the scent of decay. There was no crew, no life on board, only a pile of bones arranged in the shape of a rune. And then I heard it. A chant, low and guttural. It seemed to come from beneath the water. It rattled my bones, chilled my blood, and I knew with every fiber of my being that something was very, very wrong. The ship began to move, slowly, silently. The water shifted around us, but there was no wind, no sound. I tried to move, to leap off the ship, but my feet wouldn't obey. It was like I was rooted to the spot. The chant grew louder, more insistent. And then from the water, figures began to rise. They weren't human. Their faces were bloated and pale, their eyes black pits of nothingness. They climbed aboard the ship, moving slowly, jerking unnaturally like puppets with broken strings. One of them reached for me. Its hand was cold like ice. "Join the crew," it rasped, its voice grinding like stones scraping together. I screamed and wrenched my arm away, stumbling back onto the shore, my heart pounding. The figures stood at the edge of the ship, staring at me with empty eyes as it drifted away, the chant slowly fading into the night. I ran as fast as I could back to the town, but when I reached the streets they were empty, silent. The torches had burned out. The festival that had been so alive with fire and laughter was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. In the distance I saw the main longship, the one that had been the centerpiece of the festival, now ablaze. But this time there were no cheers. Only screams, blood-curdling screams that cut through the night air like a knife. And then, through my camera lens, I saw them, figures, the same twisted, bloated faces from the ship walking among the crowd, claiming them one by one. No one saw it. No one heard the screams. They were too entranced by the fire. I tried to warn them. I screamed, I begged, but it was too late. I didn't stay in Lerwick. I fled, driving as fast as I could until the town was just a memory in my rearview mirror. The roads were empty, the world silent, but something was wrong. The further I drove, the colder it got. My breath fogged up the windshield and frost began creeping along the edges of the glass. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there it was. The hollow-eyed figure sitting in the back seat, its reflection flickering in and out of existence like a flame. The chant began again, but this time it was my voice. Join the crew. The veil of Taipusam, a ritual gone wrong. The rhythmic beat of the drums thudded in my chest, each pulse matching my heartbeat as I stood there, lost in the crowd. The devotees draped in saffron robes, their bodies pierced by silver hooks and skewers, moved forward in a trance, their steps slow but deliberate. Taipusam, the festival of devotion, penance and purification, was in full swing. But amidst the fervor, the fervent prayers and the kaleidoscope of colors, something felt off. Something darker. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was just a curious observer, a journalist eager to document a celebration of faith. Yet when the eyes of one of the kavadi bearers locked with mine, I felt it. A weight heavy and suffocating. The weight of something ancient and angry. My name's Arjun. I've built a career chasing the forgotten rituals, the hidden corners of the world where belief and fear intertwine. Taipusam, with its ritual piercings and devotees, was supposed to be my next big feature, a deep dive into a cultural tradition that has remained unchanged for centuries. I arrived at the Batu Caves in Malaysia, my camera in hand, eager to capture the spectacle of devotion. But what began as a cultural exploration soon shifted. As I watched the kavadi bearers march toward the temple, piercing their skin in dedication, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by the crowd, but by something hidden deep within the shadows of the limestone caves. The Batu Caves were breathtaking. Towering limestone formations, golden statues gleaming in the flickering light of oil lamps, the air thick with the sweet scent of camphor and jasmine. The chants of the faithful reverberated through the vast caverns, a sound so pure it almost felt sacred. But as I ventured deeper into the caves, something changed. The drums grew uneven, the rhythm faltering as though the very heart of the festival was struggling to maintain its beat. The shadows, once cast by the glow of lanterns, began to stretch unnaturally, twisting and writhing like living things. The devotees around me were entranced, their eyes glazed, muttering prayers. But then something else echoed through the air, a low, guttural chant. It wasn't human. It came from the depths of the caves, vibrating in the very stones beneath my feet. I pressed on, determined to see more, to understand what lay at the heart of this ritual. But as I moved deeper into the caves, the crowd thinned, the noise dulled, and the temperature dropped. That's when I saw her. A woman dressed in white, standing alone in the shadows, her face obscured. Her eyes hollow, her expression unreadable, her gaze fixed on me. Without a word, she pointed toward a narrow side tunnel, one that wasn't part of the main path. "Don't go there," a devotee whispered in my ear, her grip tight on my arm. "That's where they take the unworthy." But curiosity clawed at me, and despite the warning, I broke free from the crowd and followed her gesture. The tunnel was narrow, the air damp and cool, and the sound of my footsteps echoed in the silence. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating me as I ventured deeper. At the end of the tunnel, I found a hidden chamber. It was small, barely illuminated by a single flickering oil lamp. In the center of the room stood an altar, ancient symbols etched into the stones surrounding it. The air was thick with the scent of something metallic, blood. As I approached, the temperature plummeted, the hairs on my neck standing on end. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. A man, or what used to be a man. His skin was ashen, his body adorned with fresh piercings that dripped with blood. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice distorted, layered with something not quite human. Before I could react, the shadows in the room moved, coiling around him like serpents. They weren't just shadows. They were alive, stretching and contorting as if they had a will of their own. Panic surged through me. I turned to run, but the tunnel behind me was gone. The walls of the chamber shifted, glowing symbols illuminating the space with an eerie, otherworldly light. The figure lunged at me, his movements jerky, unnatural. Desperation fueled my actions, and I grabbed the oil lamp, swinging it wildly. The flames barely kept him back, the heat scorching my skin. "Leave." The voice wasn't his. It came from the altar itself, deep, guttural, and terrifying. With one final, desperate movement, I smashed the lamp onto the altar. The room exploded in flames. The shadows screamed as they burned, their writhing forms consumed by the fire. But the man's face, it burned into my memory. It wasn't rage, it wasn't pain, it was something far worse. It was a smile. I woke up outside the caves, lying on the ground, the festival still echoing around me. Concerned festival goers surrounded me, whispering about how they had found me unconscious near the procession. The tunnel, gone, the hidden chamber, nowhere to be found. But as I stood to leave, I reached into my pocket and found something. A small charm, blood-stained and carved with the same symbols I had seen on the altar. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't escaped, I hadn't been freed, I'd been marked, and the festival, it wasn't over for me, it had just begun. Whispers of the Galden Namchot, a festival of darkness. I've never believed in spirits, not in the way the old stories tell. But something changed as the Galden Namchot festival approached. It was subtle at first, a faint chill in the air, a growing weight in my chest. But I felt it deep within me, intensifying day by day. The streets of my hometown were alive with celebration, but I, the outsider, couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. Something was watching. Something was waiting. Call me Tenzin, and I've spent years as a journalist, observing the world through a lens of reason and skepticism. The Galden Namchot Festival, A time-honored tradition celebrating the triumph of light over darkness was a story I thought I knew well. I had grown up hearing about it from the elders, the songs, the dances, the prayers. But this year, something was different. The stories they'd shared, whispers of a curse that lingered over the village during the festival, had always seemed like superstition. But the more I listened, the more I saw things that I couldn't explain, things that made my rational mind tremble. The air was thick with the smell of burning juniper and incense as the festival began. The streets were draped in colorful prayer flags, and the sound of drums vibrated through my body. But it wasn't the celebration that caught my attention, it was the people. They moved in unison, yet there was something wrong in their eyes, hollow, distant, like they were walking in a trance. The energy of the festival, meant to uplift, felt like a heavy shroud weighing down on my chest. The drumming, once vibrant, now felt like the rhythm of something darker, as though it was calling from the depths of the earth. I pushed through the crowd, trying to ignore the feeling creeping up my spine. Then a woman approached me. Her face was hidden behind a veil, but I saw the wild fear in her eyes as she whispered urgently, "You don't belong here. You're not supposed to be part of this. It will come for you." Her voice was drowned by the drumming, but the words echoed in my mind long after she disappeared into the crowd. I tried to brush off her warning, chalking it up to the ramblings of a frightened woman. But as night fell, something shifted in the atmosphere. The sounds of the festival, the laughter, the cheers, the music faded, blending into a low, distorted hum. The world felt like it was vibrating at a frequency that made my skin crawl. Then came the first sign. A shadow, too quick, too dark to be human, rushed across the bonfire. My heart skipped a beat and I spun around, searching for the source. But there was nothing. The crowd moved on, oblivious. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, but the dread in my chest grew into something more suffocating. Something was watching me. I tried to leave, but the streets felt alive, shifting, closing in around me. Every path I took seemed to lead me deeper into the heart of the festival. The crowd, their eyes empty, their faces frozen in forced smiles, seemed to follow my every move. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. And then the whispers began. Faint at first, just soft murmurs like voices carried by the wind, but they grew louder, more distinct. "Join us," they whispered. "You cannot escape." I spun around, but no one was there. I could feel my sanity fraying at the edges, the line between reality and nightmare blurring. I stumbled through the festival, trying to find anyone who could explain this madness. But all I saw were the same lifeless faces, all of them caught in the same dark trance. And then I saw it, a dark figure standing motionless in the center of the crowd, bathed in the flickering light of the bonfires. It was waiting. My heart raced as I pushed through the crowd, my eyes fixed on the figure. It didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. And then, as if the crowd itself had parted for him, the figure stepped forward. It was a man, or had been once. His face was a grotesque mask of death, skin stretched tight over hollow bones, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You should never have come," the figure rasped, its voice like ice scraping over bone. "The festival is not just for the living. It is a ritual, a sacrifice." I wanted to run. My legs screamed to move, but they wouldn't obey. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the oppressive curse hanging over this place, pulling me deeper into its darkness. The whispers turned to screams, agonizing, desperate cries of trapped souls who had become part of this twisted ritual. "The darkness has been waiting for you." The figure's voice chilled me to my core. I woke up the next morning, drenched in sweat, my body trembling as though the horrors of the night were still closing in. I thought it had been a nightmare, But when I stepped outside, everything was different. The streets were empty. The bonfires had burned down to ash, the prayer flags hung limp in the wind. And in the distance, standing alone under the pale light of the morning, I saw the figure. It hadn't moved. Its eyes burned with the same unholy light, waiting, watching. The festival was over, but the darkness had not gone. It had been real, and I was not the first, nor would I be the last. The Dark Parade, haunting secrets of the Rose Parade. Have you ever wondered what secrets lie behind the vibrant petals of a rose? What if the flowers you admired were more than just beautiful, they were alive, and watching you? I had no idea what I was stepping into when I took on this year's Rose Parade. My name is Maya, and for the past 5 years I've designed the floats for this iconic event. This year, however, something felt different. It all started with the flowers. At first I brushed it off, stress, lack of sleep, maybe a little paranoia. But then the roses began to pulse as if breathing. The fragrance became so overwhelming it almost felt like it was choking me. And the whispers, always whispers in the air, as if the flowers themselves were trying to tell me something. The day was supposed to be perfect. The sun hung high, the streets buzzed with excitement, and the scent of roses filled the air. But there was a dark undertone I couldn't shake. The float I was working on, a stunning display of crimson roses and white lilies, seemed to have an energy all its own. Every time I touched a petal, I felt it twitch beneath my fingers like it was alive, pulling away from me. At first I thought I was imagining things. I've worked with flowers for years, but these roses, they didn't behave like any I'd ever known. Their fragrance was intoxicating, almost metallic, and the petals, they were too soft, too warm. The other workers, they were acting strange too. Quiet, distant, their eyes glazed as if they were under some kind of spell. I tried to shake off the feeling, but deep down, I knew I was on the verge of something I couldn't control. As night fell, the once vibrant streets grew cold. An unnatural silence washed over the town. The wind, which had been soft and playful earlier, now carried something else, whispers. They were faint at first, like a breeze brushing against my ear, but they grew louder, more distinct, my name. Maya, remember? I shook my head, trying to push away the rising dread. My mother, the woman who had once designed the first float, had mysteriously disappeared years ago. No one talked about her anymore, but I knew deep down her disappearance was tied to something sinister. Now I felt it. The same fear, the same pull that had taken her away. As I walked through the nearly empty streets, the air thickened with tension. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath. In the distance, the sound of petals fluttering on the wind sent chills down my spine. The roses were everywhere, on the floats, in every corner of town, and I could feel their presence watching me. I wasn't just imagining it. They were alive, and they wanted something from me. I tried to tell myself I was just stressed, but I couldn't deny it anymore. The flowers were connected to my mother's disappearance, to the strange rituals I had heard whispers of for years. The more I dug into the past, the more the truth became clear. These flowers were not just decorations. They were the physical manifestation of a curse, one that had been passed down through generations, hidden beneath the glitz and glamour of the parade. The next day, everything changed. The parade began with its usual fanfare, but the air felt different. The roses that had once seemed so beautiful now seemed ominous, their petals twitching, almost as if they were alive and feeding off the energy of the crowd. The floats glided down the street, but the faces of the performers, once full of joy, were now expressionless, vacant. It wasn't long before I realized the truth. The flowers were not just part of the parade, they were controlling the people. The workers, the performers, the spectators, they were all puppets, their minds and bodies under the influence of the floral curse. Desperate to understand the curse, I found myself drawn to the hidden garden beneath the town, the very place where the first roses for the parade had been harvested. And there, amidst the tangled vines and overgrown blooms, I uncovered the horrific truth. My mother had been part of the original ritual that kept the curse alive. She had tried to break free to destroy the flowers, but the curse caught her, trapping her within the petals forever. Now it was my turn. The town, the parade, and the flowers, they were all part of the same dark web. The floral curse had consumed everything, and I had to make a choice. Destroy the flowers and risk being consumed by the curse myself, or allow the ritual to complete, freeing my mother's spirit, but at the cost of the entire town's soul. I thought I destroyed the garden. The flowers, the curse, it all seemed to vanish in a burst of flames. But as I stood there, panting and exhausted, I noticed something. A single rose bloomed in the window of my childhood home. My mother's voice called to me, soft and coaxing. "Maya, join me." And in that moment I realized that the curse was far from over. The flowers had taken me just as they had taken my mother. I was bound to them now. The Rose Parade was no longer a celebration, it was a trap, and I was its newest victim. Was the curse real, or was I just losing my mind? You decide. But one thing's for sure, the dark secrets of the Rose Parade will never be the same again. The story unfolds in my voice, drawing you deeper into the mystery. My perception blurs, my thoughts unravel, and you will feel my paranoia, my fear. What's real? What's a figment of my crumbling sanity? One thing's for sure, you won't be able to look at roses the same way again. Stay tuned and remember, the flowers are always watching. For those who seek the chills of the unknown, or for anyone who needs a haunting tale to haunt your dreams, this is for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. Frozen Shadows, the haunting of Harbin Ice and Snow Festival. The icy wind cut through my scarf like a knife as I stepped into the glowing maze of the Harbin Ice and Snow Festival. The air shimmered with 1,000 colors reflecting off the crystalline sculptures, and laughter echoed all around me. But amidst the dazzling lights and joyous sounds, something felt wrong. It wasn't the cold or the crowd. It was the weight of the message scratched into my hotel mirror that morning. Find me before the ice melts. My name is Y. This trip to Harbin was supposed to be a fresh start. After my breakup and the collapse of my journalism career, I thought immersing myself in the festival's beauty would help me forget. But now every breath of the frosty air felt heavy, like the icy walls around me were closing in. The festival grounds buzzed with energy. Families marveled at the sculptures and couples posed for pictures under glowing ice arches. Yet I couldn't shake the strange occurrences, shadows flitting across the sculptures, too fast to be human. Footsteps appearing in the snow behind me even though no one was there. And that sound, a low, rhythmic hum like the faintest echo of breathing coming from deep within the ice. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But the deeper I ventured into the festival, the louder the hum grew, and the more those shadows danced in my peripheral vision. The whispers led me to the Palace of Eternal Winter, the festival's grand centerpiece. I can still feel the awe I felt stepping inside. The ice walls rose impossibly high, shimmering in hues of blue and white. Chandeliers made of frozen droplets hung overhead, casting prismatic light across the room. Every step echoed faintly, the sound swallowed by the sheer cold. I ran my hand along one of the pillars, marveling at the intricate carvings of mythical creatures. The ice felt oddly warm, as though it were alive. That's when I saw her. Encased in the ice was the figure of a woman. Her face was contorted in a silent scream, her hand pressed against the frozen surface as if she'd been trying to escape. Her eyes, they seemed to follow me, pleading silently. I blinked and she was gone. Just a trick of the light, I thought. But the whispers began again, faint but insistent. Find me. Save me. Every step I took deeper into the palace made me question reality. The sculptures seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. The hum grew louder, almost like a heartbeat now, resonating through the icy walls. Was the woman real? Was the ice playing tricks on me? Or was it my mind unraveling? I stumbled upon a chamber where the air grew colder, biting into my skin despite my thick coat. In the center stood a colossal sculpture of a woman chained to an icy throne, her face eerily similar to the figure I'd seen before. The whispers crescendoed. Break the ice. Free me. I wasn't alone anymore. The hum morphed into a low growl and I turned to see it. A towering figure of ice and shadow. Its jagged body shimmered in the dim light and its glowing blue eyes locked onto mine. Frost formed in the air around it, and its movements were deliberate, predatory. I ran, slipping on the icy floor as the creature pursued me. Its growl echoed not just in my ears but in my mind, a voice filled with malice and hunger. My breath came in ragged gasps, clouding the air in front of me. I could feel it closing in, the temperature plummeting with every step. I reached the sculpture at the chamber's center, its frozen chains glinting like blades. The whispers were deafening now, urging me on. With trembling hands, I picked up a shard of ice and struck the base of the sculpture. The ice cracked, fissures spreading like lightning across its surface. The ground shook beneath me, and the creature let out a bone-chilling roar. The entire palace seemed to groan, the walls splintering as the air filled with the sound of shattering ice. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was the woman's face, no longer frozen in terror, but smiling faintly as her chains dissolved. I woke up outside the festival, surrounded by concerned onlookers. Snow clung to my clothes and I could barely feel my fingers. They said I'd been found unconscious in the snow, mumbling incoherently. When I tried to explain, they only looked at me with pity. The palace of eternal winter stood untouched, its sculptures pristine. But as I turned to leave, I caught sight of her in the crowd, the woman from the ice. She smiled at me, her breath forming frosty tendrils in the air, and whispered, "The ice never truly melts." Pahia's Festival of Fear. They say the Pahia's Festival is a celebration of life, a dazzling tribute to San Isidro, Labrador. But no one ever told me about the shadows lurking beneath the kaleidoscope of fruits and lanterns. I never believed in curses or spirits, until I found myself standing in the middle of a ritual I could never escape. The air was heavy with the scent of ripe fruits and roasted garlic as I stepped off the bus into Lukban's vibrant chaos. The streets were alive with laughter, music, and the rhythmic pounding of drums, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. At first I chalked it up to the heat, the suffocating humidity clinging to my skin, making the embroidered blouse I wore stick to my back. I was here for a story, nothing more. Cover the Pahia's festival, write about its dazzling decorations, and head back to Manila. Simple, but as I wove through the crowd, my gaze caught a fleeting shadow. Just out of the corner of my eye, when I turned, there was nothing. Only an elderly woman with a veil over her face staring directly at me. She didn't smile, didn't speak, just stared. The decorations were mesmerizing, walls covered in golden rice stalks, houses adorned with glittering fruits and vegetables in impossible arrangements. Yet as I walked, I noticed the lights flickering. Not just the occasional lantern, but all of them in unison, as if they pulsed with the heartbeat of the festival. The laughter in the crowd felt too loud, too sharp, like it wasn't joy but something else, mockery maybe, and the drums. They weren't festive. They were relentless, their rhythm crawling into my chest, squeezing tighter with every beat. I tried to focus on my camera, snapping photos of the bright displays, but it wouldn't work. The lens kept fogging up, even though the air wasn't that cold. When I wiped it clean and looked through it again, the decorations seemed different, darker, almost decayed. I started asking questions. Most people were happy to talk about the festival's history, its connection to San Isidro, the abundance it celebrated. But when I brought up the whispers of a curse, their faces changed. One man laughed nervously and said, "Superstition, just stories to scare children." But an old woman selling rice cakes pulled me aside. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "The spirit demands an offering, always has, always will. You shouldn't have come back." Her words echoed in my mind as I walked back to my grandmother's house. That night I dreamt of my mother. She stood in a field of rice, her face serene but her eyes hollow. She reached for me, her mouth moving, but no sound came out. When I woke, my room was freezing and the same metallic scent from earlier filled the air. On the second night of the festival, I saw her again, the veiled woman. This time she wasn't alone. Figures surrounded her, their faces painted with wide, unnatural smiles. Their eyes didn't match the festive mood. They were blank, hungry. I tried to lose myself in the crowd, but the festival felt like a labyrinth. Every corner I turned brought me back to the same street. The decorations no longer shone brightly. They cast long, ominous shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable, my name, Camille. The final night of the festival was chaos. The streets were packed, the drums deafening. My grandmother had begged me not to go, but I had to see it through. The procession began with dancers, their movements hypnotic yet jagged, like marionettes on tangled strings. The crowd's cheers turned into a low hum, almost a chant. I felt hands on my arms pulling me forward. The crowd parted, revealing the center of the ritual. A massive effigy of San Isidro, its eyes glowing an unnatural red. The veiled woman stood beside it, her voice cutting through the noise. "You were always meant to return," she said. The crowd's chants grew louder, their words unintelligible but dripping with malice. My heart pounded as the ground beneath me began to tremble. As the ritual reached its peak, the veiled woman removed her covering. My breath caught. It was my mother, or what was left of her. Her face was pale, her features twisted, but her eyes, those hollow eyes, were unmistakable. "Break the cycle," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. But how? The crowd surged forward, hands reaching for me. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the drums. My mother, no, the spirit, lunged toward me and everything went black. When I woke, the streets were empty. The decorations were gone, the lights extinguished. My grandmother sat beside me, tears streaming down her face. "You broke it," she said softly. "But the cost?" I didn't have to ask, I already knew. "They say the festival will return next year brighter than ever. But I know the truth. Somewhere in Lukban the spirit still waits, and every time I close my eyes I see her, my mother's hollow eyes staring back at me. If you ever visit the Pahia's festival, beware the shadows. Some decorations are more than just for show. Curse of the Uruka Night, a Marg Bihu horror. It started as a night of celebration. Uruka Night, the eve of Marg Bihu, was always magical. Bonfires crackling, the aroma of freshly roasted pithas and the echo of laughter carried by the chilly wind. But this year was different. I was back in my village after years in the city, yearning for nostalgia and the warmth of old traditions. As I stood in the glow of the fire, surrounded by friends, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. A figure at the edge of the field, shrouded in shadows, watching. Her presence clung to the air like a storm waiting to break. I should have left then. I'm Arjun, and I came back to my village to relive the simplicity of home. The Beleghar, our makeshift bamboo hut, stood proud amidst the paddy fields, a testament to tradition. My friends Rishi, Mira and the others had joined me for the night, just like old times. We feasted, shared stories and laughed beneath the stars. Rishi, ever the storyteller, began recounting the legend of Burimeri, the spirit of a scorned woman who haunts the fields on Uruka Night. Don't wander too far, he warned with a half-smile. She's always watching. I laughed along, brushing off the unease creeping up my spine. Ghost stories were for kids, or so I thought. The night deepened and the fire cast flickering shadows across the fields. Laughter faded, swallowed by an unnatural silence. The air grew colder, sharp and biting, carrying a faint, almost metallic tang. As I stepped outside the Beleghar to stretch, the stillness pressed against me like a weight. That's when I saw them. Small footprints in the dirt, delicate and circling our hut. My heart raced. Is someone playing a prank? I whispered to myself. But deep down I knew. The figure I'd seen earlier, the woman cloaked in shadows, she wasn't a trick of the light. She was real and she was getting closer. Mira's scream shattered the silence. We rushed to her, finding her frozen, staring at the edge of the field. There's someone there, she whispered, trembling. We followed her gaze and saw her, a woman standing still, her hair flowing unnaturally as if moved by an unseen breeze. She wore a tattered sari, her face hidden, her presence radiating malice. Rishi tried to play it cool, laughing nervously. Probably just a villager, he said, but his voice betrayed him. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like the rustling of leaves. But they grew louder, surrounding us. They weren't words, just an eerie chant vibrating through the ground and into our bones. We couldn't stay in the hut. Mira begged us to leave, but Rishi insisted we find out who or what was out there. Flashlight in hand, we ventured into the fields. The woman remained still, her form barely illuminated by the moonlight. But as we approached, the flashlight flickered and died. The air turned icy, our breath visible in the cold. Why did you return? The voice echoed, distant yet intimate. I turned to Rishi, only to find him gone. In his place stood the woman, her face pale and hollow-eyed, her lips curling into a grotesque smile. You should have stayed away, she hissed, her voice layered with something inhuman. Panic overtook me and I ran blindly, the once familiar fields now an endless maze of shadows. The whispers followed, joined by Rishi's voice calling my name. I stumbled and fell, my hands sinking into cold, wet earth. When I looked up I saw him, or something that looked like him, standing ahead, his back turned. Rishi. I called out, my voice shaking. He turned, his face twisted and inhuman, his mouth opening unnaturally wide as he began to sing an old Bihu tune, his voice merging with hers. The ground beneath me cracked and I plunged into darkness, her laughter echoing around me. I woke at dawn, lying in the middle of the field. The Beleghar was gone, reduced to ashes. My friends were nowhere to be found. The villagers found me hours later, mumbling incoherently about the woman. Their faces turned grim and they muttered about Burimarie. They told me I was lucky to be alive, but I don't feel lucky. Every Yoruka night since, I hear the whispers on the wind and see her at the edge of the fields, waiting for the next fool to return. The dark skies of Uterayan, a kite festival nightmare. Imagine a place where the skies are alive with color, where the wind carries laughter, and yet something feels wrong. A nightmare hiding in the festival air. This is the story of my encounter with the spirits of Uterayan, a celebration that should have been joy, but became something else entirely. The wind was howling, pulling at my hair, my clothes, as the sun dipped below the horizon. The International Kite Festival in Uterayan, an event known for its vibrant colors and joyful celebrations, was in full swing, yet something felt off. I had come here to cover the event, to write about the joy, the excitement, the tradition. But as the kites soared above me, weaving their way through the sky, the air grew thick, suffocating almost. It wasn't just the wind. Something else, something darker, was taking hold. Call me Arjun, and I never believed in the supernatural. I'm a journalist, a skeptic, always looking for the rational explanation. I'd heard the rumors, of course. Every year strange things happened during Uterayan. Children would say they saw shadows in the sky. Some of the older folks talked about dark kites, spirits trapped in the wind. They called it a curse. I laughed it off, until I saw it with my own eyes. As the sun set, the kites twisted and swirled in the air, but there was something unnatural about it. The strings snapped, jerked, as though controlled by unseen hands. And that hum in the air, it wasn't the sound of joy, of festival music. No, it was something deeper, something that crawled beneath my skin, making my hairs stand on end. The scent of incense mixed with the fresh, crisp air, but underneath it I smelled something foul, something decayed. A sense of unease clawed at me as I stood in the crowd. Laughter echoed around me, but it was distorted, warped, as if it were coming from a distant place. And then the first scream. I spun around to see a woman clutching her chest, staring up at the sky with wide, horrified eyes. But she wasn't looking at any of the kites. No, her gaze was fixed on something dark in the clouds. I started to move toward her, but before I could reach her, she collapsed, her body crumpling to the ground, unconscious. The crowd didn't react. They were still laughing, still flying their kites, unaware of the horror unfolding right in front of them. I tried to get help. I yelled for assistance, but no one listened. The air around me felt thick, heavier with each breath, as though the wind itself was pushing me back. Each step I took felt like wading through mud, the pressure mounting, making it harder to move. Then I saw it. A kite. Black as night, its movements jerky and unnatural. It cut through the sky with an eerie speed. It passed overhead, and for the briefest moment I heard a voice, whispering my name. The sky had darkened, the once festive mood turning into something chaotic, something frantic. The kites were no longer dancing, they were attacking. The sharp snap of kites being cut from their strings filled the air, echoing like the screams of animals in pain. People were still flying their kites, but their faces, their eyes were glazed over. They weren't themselves. Their smiles were too wide, too fixed. I had to leave, but it wasn't that easy. I stumbled through the crowds, trying to make my way to the exit, but it was like walking through a nightmare. The people around me were distorted, their voices garbled, like I was hearing them underwater. The kites, they were everywhere now, descending as if they were hunting me. I found a small group huddled together near the edge of the field. One of them whispered to me, her voice hollow, drained of hope. "It's too late for us. Help us! That's when I saw it again. The dark kite. It glided just above the crowd, its shadow stretching across the people beneath it. I felt my heart race. There was fear, yes. But there was something else too, something darker, something that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead. The crowd had thinned, but the dark kite was still there, watching. I knew I had to understand what was happening. I had to get to the source of it. I ran toward the edge of the festival grounds, near the wind turbines that powered the kites. And that's when I saw him, a man, or something that looked like a man. He was standing in the shadow of the turbines, dressed in tattered robes. His face was obscured by a dark cloth, but I could feel his gaze. Cold, burning. You shouldn't have come here, he rasped. The spirits have been awakened, you can't leave. He raised his hand, and with a sickening crack, the dark kite above us snapped its string. It plummeted toward the ground with a horrible thud. I turned to run, but the wind shifted. The real kites, the colorful, joyful kites, began to fall too, as if they were chasing me, hunting me. I don't know how I made it out. Somehow I stumbled back to the hotel, breathless, shaking. The festival was over. The kites were gone. The air was still. But then I saw it. A single black kite lying at the foot of my bed. Its string was tangled in my fingers as if it had followed me. The whispers had started again, louder this time, scratching at the edges of my mind. I should have left earlier, but now I can't help but wonder, did I truly escape? Or is the kite still watching me? Is the festival really over, or is it just beginning? I don't know if I'll ever be able to look up at the sky the same way again. Whispers between the pages. Horror at the Jaipur Literature Festival. The Jaipur Literature Festival, an event I'd dreamed of attending for years. A place where the power of words and stories ignites in the heart of Rajasthan. But as soon as I entered the vibrant tents, something in the air felt wrong. It was thick, heavy, like the very ground beneath me had absorbed every spoken word that had ever echoed in that space. My footsteps seemed too loud, like the earth was echoing them back. And then, the whispers. At first I thought it was just the hum of the crowd, the mingling voices of eager readers and authors. But as I stepped deeper into the sea of people, I knew something darker was lurking beneath the surface of this celebration. My name's Eerie. I've spent years writing about events, festivals, and stories, anything that could turn into an article, but I've never felt anything like this. The Jaipur Literature Festival should have been an overwhelming sea of excitement, and at first it was. The warm glow of lights above, the excited chatter of hundreds of book lovers, it was intoxicating. But as I moved between tables of books, my eyes met theirs, faces of attendees, their gazes too focused, too eager. They didn't look like typical festival goers. They almost looked hungry. I shook it off. Maybe it was jet lag, maybe the heat. But as I walked further, the whispers began. Soft at first, barely audible. It was like the rustling of pages, the faintest sounds at the edge of my hearing. But they grew louder, more distinct, until it felt like the books themselves were calling me. Listen, they whispered. Raid me. I tried to ignore it, but something deep inside me knew this wasn't just a festival. I found myself at a stall I didn't remember seeing before, nestled in the far corner of the hall. The books were different here. Old, ancient-looking, stacked in towering piles as if they had been untouched for centuries. The air around the stall was thick, suffocating, like I had stepped underwater. The scent of old paper and dust was overwhelming, but beneath it there was something else. A faint, metallic scent I couldn't place. The books, they were staring at me. The titles shimmered, written in languages I couldn't recognize, glowing faintly in the flickering light. "Come closer," a voice whispered, the words slipping into my ear so close I felt the warmth of breath. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. My feet felt rooted to the floor, yet my hands reached for the nearest book. Trembling, I pulled a heavy tome from the stack. It had a cracked leather cover, and the moment my fingers brushed the pages, the whispers stopped. A bone-chilling silence followed. That's when I saw him. He was standing across the room, too still, too out of place among the crowd. An older man with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through me, watching with an unnerving intensity. I tried to focus, but it was like the air around him bent and warped, making him seem unreal. His smile thin and cold. "You shouldn't have touched it," he said, his voice smooth, almost like silk. "Now they know you're here." I couldn't understand what he meant, but the cold dread that shot through me told me I had made a mistake. The crowd had changed. Their faces, they were different. They weren't human anymore. Their eyes were fixed on the books, their lips moving in an eerie, uniform chant. "Not real, can't escape." The whispers returned, but now they weren't coming from the books. They were coming from the people. I could hear them, their voices low and desperate. They were pleading with me, or maybe warning me. I tried to leave, but the ground beneath me was shifting. The floorboards groaned, bending like they were made of paper. The world around me seemed to fold in on itself. It felt like the entire festival was becoming a part of the story, the very fabric of reality warping. The walls pulsed with a strange rhythm, and that's when I understood. The words on the pages were alive. They weren't written with ink, they were written with something darker, something ancient. The words weren't meant to be read. They were meant to consume. I looked around, the crowd was gone. The man with hollow eyes stood before me now, his smile widening in grotesque welcome. "Welcome to the story," he whispered. "You're a part of it now." I ran. My heart pounded in my ears as I sprinted through the twisting maze of books, the very air feeling heavier with each breath. No matter which path I took, I kept ending up deeper in the labyrinth. Every exit led to more rows of ancient tomes, their pages turning on their own in the dim light. And then I saw it. A massive book hovering in the air, glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. The pages flipped rapidly as if caught in an unseen wind. "This is the end," the man's voice echoed, distorted, filling the space around me. "But it's also the beginning." My body froze. The pages seemed to beckon, pulling me in. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The book opened, its pages swirling around me like a vortex. I felt myself being drawn into it, into the words, into the story. The last thing I felt was the cold embrace of the pages, their words wrapping around my skin, my soul. And then darkness. I woke up in a hotel room, disoriented. The lights above flickered and a sharp headache pulsed through my skull. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, trying to ground myself in the real world. But then, a message from an unknown number. "The story never ends." I stared at the screen, chills running down my spine. And then a second message popped up. An image of me standing in the middle of the Jaipur Literature Festival, holding a book I had no memory of picking up. And once again I felt the weight of the pages pressing against me. I had never truly left the story. The Mummer's Curse, haunting secrets behind the parade. I never thought a parade could destroy everything I knew about reality. But here I am, standing at the edge of a nightmare I can't escape. The Mummers Parade was supposed to be a dream come true for me, a theatre student eager to prove myself. But I should have never touched that mask. Now I can feel it watching me, whispering in my mind. Every step I take, the parade draws me deeper into its curse. And I can't stop. Everyone calls me Ellie. I came to Philadelphia with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. I wanted to perform, to be part of something bigger, like the Mummers Parade where legends are born. But I never expected to find myself tangled in a nightmare. I was supposed to be studying, preparing, learning from the best. But instead I stumbled into something far worse. It started with an antique shop, a mask that called to me like it was meant for me. A beautiful thing, golden with intricate carvings. The shopkeeper warned me it was cursed. I didn't listen. I thought I was strong enough to handle it, but I was wrong. When I first put it on, everything shifted. A wave of dizziness washed over me and the world blurred. I thought it was just excitement, just the nerves of preparing for the parade. But I should have known better. The Mummers Parade is full of energy, joy, brass bands blasting, laughter echoing through the streets and colorful costumes swirling like confetti in the wind. The smell of pretzels and sweet funnel cakes fills the air. It's a celebration of life. But something felt off. A strange buzzing in the air, like static, like something was watching. The textures of the costumes, smooth and elaborate, felt different on my skin. Every time I turned, there was someone's gaze locked onto me, and it wasn't just a glance. It felt like they could see through me into something I wasn't ready to face. I wanted to ignore it. But the moment I stepped away from the parade, the world changed. The streets darkened and a damp, musty smell followed me, a thick, suffocating odor that clung to everything. And when I went deeper into the history of the parade, it wasn't the festive excitement I found. No, it was something far older. Darker, the deeper I dug, the more oppressive the silence became. It was just a simple mask, I told myself. A costume. But the more I wore it, the stranger things became. The world around me felt like it was twisting. People, my friends, my mentor, started acting off. Whispers behind my back, strange glances, uneasy silences. I couldn't take the mask off. Even when I tried, it felt like something inside me was begging me to put it back on. Like I had no choice. And then the real horrors began. I started seeing things. Shadows that moved when no one was around. The people in the parade, the ones I thought I knew, none of them were the same. Their eyes, once full of life, were now empty. The mask was changing me, pulling me deeper into a world that didn't belong to the living. But I couldn't stop. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to be part of the parade. It wasn't just the mask, it was everything around me. My father, my estranged father, a former mummer who disappeared years ago, started appearing in the crowd. But he wasn't the same. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, like he was staring through me, not at me. I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe it was the stress of the parade, the pressure to live up to my father's legacy. But then another performer, one who had worn the mask before, started acting erratically. They said the mask had passed through many hands, each one meeting a tragic end. Was my father one of them? Was I becoming like him? Reality was slipping away. The line between what was real and what was part of the mask blurred, and I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. The curse of the Mummers Parade is no simple thing. It's ancient. It feeds off those who wear the mask. The more I wore it, the more it consumed me, turning my world into something twisted. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. People morphed into blank-faced puppets moving without life. And the whispers, they were always there, just out of reach, but never truly silent. I was never alone. The worst part, the curse is not just about the mask, it's about what the mask does to you. How it pulls you into a world where time doesn't exist, where the past, present, and future become one. The mask isn't just an object, it's alive. It's watching, waiting, and when it's done with you, you're no longer human. The truth hit me like a wave. The mask wasn't just a part of the parade, it was the parade. An ancient ritual, a curse that bound the wearer's soul to the procession itself. Forever. To break the curse, I had to do what my father did, sacrifice myself. But as the parade drew closer, the mask had already taken control. My body moved without my permission, my mind screaming in protest. And when I reached the stage, I saw them. The crowd, now filled with grotesque figures, their faces twisted and pale. I stood before them, trapped in my body, forced to perform as my father had done years before me. I had a choice. Let the curse consume me completely or risk everything to break free. I shattered the mask, I thought I was free. But the parade didn't stop. The floats rolled on. The performers kept dancing, the music never stopped, and then I saw him. My father. Still wearing the mask, still part of the parade, the curse had not been lifted. And now I'm part of it too, I can't escape. I am trapped, a spectator in my own nightmare, forced to watch as new souls become ensnared by the same mask. And the worst part, I'm still here, the whispers follow me, they never left. The drums of the damned, a la tamborada horror. I thought I was here for the magic. The streets of San Sebastian were alive, bathed in the glow of lanterns and the beat of thousands of drums. La tamborada, they called it, a celebration of the city's heritage. But as the rhythmic drumming echoed through the night, something felt wrong. It wasn't a celebration, it was a summons. I should have left when the drums first started to change, when the beats grew darker, heavier, and seemed to pulse through my very bones. But I didn't. And now it's too late, the curse has me. This is Julia, and I thought I was escaping the monotony of my life in Barcelona. I came to San Sebastian to cover the festival, meet new people, enjoy the vibrant atmosphere. I wanted to write a story, capture the magic, maybe even experience it. But something about the drumming, the rhythm, the endless thudding, it started following me. At first it was distant, almost pleasant, blending with the crowd. But as the night wore on, the drumming changed. It became louder, more insistent, and it wasn't just outside anymore, it was inside my head. I thought it was part of the excitement. But that was before I realized the drums weren't just an instrument of celebration. They were the pulse of something ancient, something that had been calling for me. The night was thick with the scent of grilled meat, the air warm with the mingling of bodies, music, and laughter. The festival was alive, pulsing with life. But the further I wandered, the more the sounds of the celebration faded. What replaced them was a deep, rhythmic thudding that reverberated in my chest. It wasn't music anymore. It was a heartbeat, a pulse that I could feel in the soles of my feet as I walked. The streets twisted, growing darker, the lights flickering. I stepped into an alley, hoping to escape the growing unease. But there was something there, a strange scent, like burning wood, old leather, and decay. It was familiar, and it made my stomach turn. And then I saw them. The figures in traditional costumes, their faces hidden behind wooden masks. They were marching, but they weren't part of the crowd. They weren't in sync. Their movements were deliberate, as if they were following me. Their drumming was different. It wasn't part of the festival anymore, it was a calling. And somehow my feet moved toward them. I didn't want to follow, but I couldn't stop myself. The figures led me deeper into the city, farther from the crowds, into a deserted square. The drumming was deafening now. I could feel it, the rhythm pounding inside my chest like a second heartbeat. It was everywhere, inside me, around me. It was too much. My head was spinning. I turned to leave, but the figures closed in. Their footsteps were heavier now, synchronized with the thudding that filled my ears. One of them reached out to me, their hand icy cold. The touch sent a shock through my body, and before I could react, they pulled me into the center of the square. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my heart racing. They didn't answer. Instead, their drums beat louder, faster. The crowd around me, those who had been watching just moments ago, were no longer smiling. Their eyes were empty, lifeless, as if the rhythm had stolen their souls. They surrounded me, an endless sea of masked faces, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I was trapped. It was then that I understood. The drumming wasn't just a festival tradition, it was a ritual, a pact. Long ago, the people of San Sebastian had made a deal, an ancient promise to keep the city prosperous. But there was a price. Every year, the festival had to claim a sacrifice, a soul to feed the drums. And now they were here for me. The figures, the drummers, they weren't performers. They were guardians of this curse, bound to it for centuries. Their drumming wasn't music. It was the heartbeat of the curse itself. I struggled, but my body felt like lead. The drumming drained me, numbed me. The crowd, no, the ritual, pulled me closer to the center of the square. And there, looming in the darkness, was the largest drum, the source of the pulse that had been driving me mad. I was nothing more than an offering. The figures closed in around me, their masks now twisted, grotesque, faces contorted in agony. Their eyes glowed unnaturally, flickering like dying embers in the dark. The drum beats were no longer just sound, they were alive. A living thing pulsing in time with my own racing heart. "Join us," they whispered, but the voice wasn't one, it was a chorus. Thousands of voices overlapping, filling my mind with their rhythm. "Become one with us." I fought to break free, but the rhythm, no, the curse, had taken control. My body moved on its own, pulling me closer toward the center, toward the last drumbeat that would seal my fate. I reached out, hoping for a way to escape, but it was hopeless. The pulse was stronger than me. The last beat hit. I woke up in my hotel room, bathed in the soft morning light. My phone buzzed, messages from friends wondering how the festival went. But something was wrong. The streets were too quiet, too empty. I looked out the window, expecting to see the remnants of the celebration, the streets still alive with the afterglow of the festival. But there was nothing. The drumming had stopped, or so I thought. The soft thudding was still there, it was inside me now, in my chest. Thump, 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 and when I looked into the mirror I saw it, the mask, hidden beneath my reflection, staring back at me. "It's not over, it's never over. The drums will keep calling, and I will answer." Festival of Terror, masks of Carnaval de Negros y Blancos. I still can't shake the scent of paint that clung to my skin, the heavy smell of black and white swirling in the air, sinking into my very soul. It's a scent I can't wash away. Carnaval de Negros y Blancos in Pasto, supposed to be a celebration, a riot of color, music, and history. But instead, it became my worst nightmare. I never should have stayed. Call me Sophia, and I came to Colombia for an article. Just a simple assignment capturing the heart of a festival centuries old. The Carnaval de Negros y Blancos, celebrated with music, dance, and elaborate costumes. It was everything I had hoped for until I stepped onto the streets of Pasto. Something wasn't right. The crowd was. Too loud, too ecstatic. Everyone was pretending to be someone else. And the masks, oh the masks, everyone wore them, even the children. They hid something sinister behind their painted smiles. At first I told myself I was just caught up in the excitement, the thrill of being in a foreign place. But deep down I knew something was wrong. I should have trusted that feeling. The first night passed in a blur of fireworks, music, and faces painted in every color of the rainbow. But then there was the laughter. It wasn't right. It was deep, unsettling, like it came from somewhere far beyond joy. The night air felt heavier as the hours dragged on, thick with an energy I couldn't place. The crowd danced through the streets, and yet the rhythm, it felt wrong, almost unnatural. I couldn't ignore the faces. Those damn masks. They weren't a part of the people anymore, they were the people. Eyes behind the masks weren't joyful, they were empty, hollow. The music pulsed in my chest, the drums too loud, too much. Every clap, every stomp felt like it was vibrating through my bones. The smell of roasting meats lingered in the air, but underneath there was something else. A metallic tang like blood, like the very earth beneath our feet had soaked it up. I felt watched, always watched. I lost track of time as I wandered deeper into the festival. The streets began to change, narrowing, darkening. The laughter, the joy, it began to fade, replaced by something softer, more sinister. I stumbled into a narrow alley tucked between two ancient buildings, where the festival seemed absent, swallowed whole by the shadows. The street lamps flickered above me, casting long, distorted shadows. That's when I saw him. A man standing at the end of the alley. His mask was strange, half black, half white, with hollow eyes staring straight into me. His head tilted, unnaturally so, like he was studying me. I froze. My heart raced, and before I could even think of turning to leave, he stepped forward. The noise of the crowd seemed to muffled, absorbed by the shadows around us. "Don't run," he whispered, his voice hollow, almost like a chant. I tried to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. My body felt heavy, like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I turned to the alley, but it wasn't the same anymore. The walls closed in, the shadows shifting as if alive. The streetlights flickered and went out one by one, and the crowd's voices, they weren't human anymore. They were distorted, like the laughter of the masked people, twisted, turned into something dark. I thought I was having a panic attack, but then the air grew colder. The shadows moved, they were alive. I heard whispers, too close, way too close. I spun around. Nothing, no one, but the masks, they were everywhere now, drifting in the shadows, their hollow eyes fixed on me. Empty voids staring into my soul. The laughter grew louder, more grotesque. It wasn't joy anymore. It was hunger. A deep, ravenous hunger. I ran, I don't know where to, just away. I stumbled blindly through the streets, desperate for escape. But the festival had consumed everything. The city had become a maze of twisted faces and darkened alleys. And then I saw him again. The man. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him the shadows were alive. Figures dressed in black and white with painted faces stretching out toward me. Their eyes were voids, empty, searching. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed whole by the rhythm of the carnival. I was caught, trapped in a dance with the dead, and I couldn't move. "They're not here to celebrate," the man said, his voice hollow like it came from the deepest pits of the earth. "They've come to take what's theirs." And that's when I saw it. His mask, it wasn't static. It was moving, alive. The eyes blinked. They flickered like they were breathing. That's when I understood. The masks weren't just masks. They were living things, feeding off the souls of the festival goers, and I was next. I woke up in a hotel room, drenched in sweat. My heart hammered in my chest, the faint echoes of the festival still in my mind. The streets outside were silent, empty. The carnival was over. But then I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the street, his mask glowing eerily in the dim light. His eyes locked with mine, a knowing look like he was waiting for me. I slammed the curtains shut, but the whispers, they followed me. They never left. frozen whisper at the Sapporo Snow Festival. The cold has always unsettled me. It's not the temperature but the way it seeps into your bones, wrapping around your heart. That's why I stayed away from winter festivals until now. Standing in the heart of Sapporo's Snow Festival, surrounded by shimmering sculptures and glowing lanterns, I should have felt awe. Instead, unease crept up my spine. The snow here wasn't just snow. It was alive, watching, whispering. And somehow I knew it was whispering to me. My name is May. I'm a travel blogger, always chasing the next story, the next breathtaking destination. When I got the invitation to cover the Sapporo Snow Festival, I couldn't resist. The allure of a city transformed into a winter wonderland was irresistible. But from the moment I arrived, something felt off. The festival was bustling, throngs of people marveling at colossal snow dragons, ice castles, and intricate frozen art. Yet in the midst of the crowd, I felt isolated. The chatter around me seemed distant, muffled, as if coming from underwater. Then there were the whispers, soft, almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. They came from the snow beneath my boots, from the sculptures towering above me. May. At first I laughed, brushing it off as jet lag or overwork. But when I caught a glimpse of the same figure, tall, cloaked, and watching me from the edge of the crowd, I couldn't ignore the chill that wasn't just from the icy air. Eerie Park stretched before me, a labyrinth of frozen wonders. The snow beneath my feet crunched loudly, the sound amplified in the eerie stillness. The air smelled sharp like metal and frost, tinged with something sour I couldn't place. The sculptures were magnificent, massive, lifelike creations that seemed to breathe despite their frozen state. But one in the center demanded my attention. It was an angel, its wings spread wide as if caught mid-flight. Its face was serene, but its eyes, they were black voids that seemed to pull me in. I couldn't move. The longer I stared, the more the world around me faded. The whispers grew louder. Come closer. The wind howled suddenly, flinging snow into my face. When I blinked it away, the angel seemed closer, though I hadn't moved. Its gaze bore into me, and for the first time I felt genuinely afraid. I approached the angel, my breath coming in short, visible puffs. Something about it felt wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. My gloved hand hovered over its wing, and the moment I touched the icy surface, the world shifted. The whispers turned into a chorus of desperate voices. The ground beneath me trembled, the snow cracking like glass. A skeletal hand shot up from the ground, its fingers jagged and frostbitten. My scream caught in my throat as the snow around me erupted, revealing a figure unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was emaciated, its skin pale and cracked like ice, its eyes as black as the angel's. The air grew colder, so cold my lungs burned with every breath. The creature's mouth stretched open, revealing an abyss of darkness. It reached for me, its claws inches from my face. I stumbled back, my boots slipping on the ice. The whispers around me turned to wails, pleading voices that echoed in my ears. Help us! The crowd was gone. The festival was gone. All that remained was me and this thing. I turned to run, but the snow beneath me shifted, swallowing my feet. The angel's wings moved slowly at first, then with a violent burst that sent shards of ice flying. The creature lunged, its claw brushing my arm. The cold seeped into my skin, numbing me instantly. I screamed, thrashing, desperate to escape. With a final surge of adrenaline, I tore myself free and ran blindly into the storm. The laughter of the creature followed me, low, guttural, and filled with malice. When I finally reached my hotel room, I collapsed onto the bed, my body trembling uncontrollably. The whispers had stopped, the cold seemed to ease, and for a moment I thought it was over. But as I stepped into the bathroom, the light flickering above the mirror, I froze. In the reflection, standing just behind me, was the angel. Its hollow eyes stared into mine, and I felt the whispers begin again. Outside the window, fresh footprints marked the snow, leading directly to my door. I'm still here writing this. The whispers haven't stopped, and every time I look into the mirror, the angel is closer. If you ever visit the Sapporo Snow Festival, remember this. Some art isn't meant to be admired, and some whispers aren't meant to be heard. Cursed revelry at Dinnerjiang Festival. I'd never experienced a festival like this before. Dinnerjiang, bright, loud and full of life. But what I didn't know when I arrived in Iloilo was that this celebration wasn't just about culture. It was about something far darker, something ancient that had waited for years to resurface. The sounds of drummers pounding in my ears, the smell of incense and fried street food thick in the air, and the colorful parade around me. At first, it felt magical. But then I felt it. A cold chill creeping under my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was when I snapped a photo of the dancers in their vibrant costumes that I saw it. A face distorted, twisted with anger, lurking in the background, not of any dancer, but something far older and far more terrifying. My name's Dina Rodriguez, a 30-year-old photojournalist, and I'd come to Iloilo in search of the perfect story. I was tired of the same old gigs, the same tired features. Dinnerjiang seemed like the perfect escape. The colors, the energy, the people, it all felt like an adventure waiting to be captured. But what I didn't expect was to walk straight into a nightmare. As I moved deeper into the crowd, cameras clicking away, I caught glimpses of strange things. A man in the crowd, his gaze following me with an unsettling intensity. The lights flickering above us, casting long, disjointed shadows that seemed to move on their own. The music, it felt too loud, too fast, like it was calling something I wasn't supposed to hear. And then that face. I thought it was just the chaos of the festival, the blur of motion. But no, it was there again. A face twisted in anger, a face that didn't belong to anyone. The drums pulsed louder, deeper, more hypnotic. The rhythm was almost suffocating. I felt myself being pulled into it, the beat syncing with my heartbeat, drawing me closer to the frenzied dancers who moved like they were possessed. The air grew heavier, and a scent I couldn't quite place filled my nostrils. It was sweet, sickly sweet, but also metallic, the kind of smell that makes your stomach turn. Mixed with the incense and food, it made my head swim. But worse was the sound. Beneath the drums I could hear something else. A soft wail. It was faint but unmistakable. It wasn't the festival music. It was a cry, a mournful, ghostly cry that seemed to echo in the back of my mind. I looked around, but no one else seemed to hear it. The crowd was lost in their revelry, dancing, shouting, living in the moment. But I wasn't. I couldn't stop thinking about that face, that strange man, and the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the sounds, the sights, the figure in the crowd. When I closed my eyes, all I saw was that face again, twisted with rage, its eyes burning into mine. It was then that I heard it, someone calling my name. Dana. I turned around, but no one was there. The sound of my name echoed in the street, louder this time. I followed the voice down narrow alleyways away from the chaos of the festival. The streets felt different now, twisted. The buildings seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, and the air thickened, pressing against me. And then there it was, the altar. Surrounded by masked figures, their eyes hidden, they chanted in a language I didn't understand. One of them stepped forward, a man, his face familiar but twisted as if his features were distorted by something unseen. "You've been chosen," he whispered, his voice low, a hollow echo beneath the drums. As the festival raged on, things began to spiral. I learned of the curse, the ancient deity tied to Jiang, the god of the land, angry at those who had forgotten it, who had used the festival as a mask for centuries of sacrifice and exploitation. The drums, the dance, they were never just for celebration. They were a ritual, a call to summon the spirit. And as the festival's climax approached, the curse began to spread. I could see it now, dancers moving in ways that weren't natural, their bodies contorting as if they were being controlled by something else. The air grew heavier, thick with dread. I could barely breathe. And then it happened, people started collapsing. Their eyes rolled back. They screamed in agony, writhing as if possessed. And from the ground a dark fog began to rise, swirling and thick like it was alive. This wasn't just a festival, it was a trap, and I was caught in it. In the heart of the chaos, I found myself pulled into the center of the ceremony, the dance of the fallen. My body moved against my will, the rhythm of the drums taking over. I couldn't fight it, I couldn't breathe. Then the figure appeared, its presence overwhelming. The deity unseen, but its power felt in every fiber of my being. I was being consumed, drawn into the ritual. The ground beneath me cracked, and the city seemed to groan as if it were alive. I had to stop it, I had to escape. But the festival's grip on me was too strong. My body moved in sync with the dancers, and I could feel myself slipping. Was this real, or had I already lost my mind? I woke up on the cold, hard street at dawn. The festival was over. The city was quiet, but I wasn't alone. My camera was beside me. I didn't remember taking it with me. The next year someone else found it, a foreigner just like me. And in the camera they found my last photo. It was my face, twisted in terror, caught in the moment I was swallowed by the curse. And the Jiang festival, it continues. The rhythm of the drums, the masked dancers and the whispers, they are still there, waiting for the next soul to claim. The haunting of Burns Night. I've never been one to shy away from the darker corners of history, but tonight is different. The air smells of whiskey, wood smoke, and something far colder, almost as if the earth itself is holding its breath. As I step into the candlelit hall, the familiar sound of bagpipes fills the room and laughter bubbles up from the guests around me. The floor beneath my boots creaks with each step, a reminder that this village, Kinloch, has lived with centuries of tradition. Burns Night here is no mere celebration, it's a piece of living history. But there's something else. A quiet pulse beneath the merriment, an energy I can't quite place. As I look around, I know the night will take a turn I never could have expected. The moment I uncover what's hidden in the village archives, something ancient and forgotten, it's as if the ground shifts beneath my feet. And when the poem is recited aloud, the air changes. The warmth of the room disappears, replaced by a creeping chill. The shadows grow longer, and that's when I realize this isn't just a poem. It's a curse, and it's coming for all of us. Everyone calls me Rory Mackenzie, and I've always had a passion for history, especially when it comes to Scotland's greatest poet, Robert Burns. It's what brought me to Kinloch in the first place. This tiny village, wrapped in tradition, seems like the perfect place to escape my past and focus on my work. Little did I know my obsession with the past would lead me straight into a nightmare. The Burns night celebration was well underway. Candles flickered in the dark, whiskey flowed freely, and I could hear the distant echo of bagpipes filling the air. But my mind was elsewhere. While others were lost in the festivities, I found myself in the dusty village archives, hunting for a forgotten piece of Burns' legacy. That's when I found it, a manuscript, yellowed with age, tucked away in a corner as if it had been deliberately hidden. Curiosity burned in me. I had to read it. The poem spoke of betrayal, of a curse placed on this very land, sealed with the words of Robert Burns himself. I could feel the weight of it as I read, each line twisting my insides. It felt wrong, but I couldn't stop. I brought the manuscript to the hall, eager to share my find, unaware of the terror it would unleash. As I stood before the group, reciting the poem with the confidence of a historian, the room grew unnervingly quiet. The words spilled from my mouth, and with each syllable the air seemed to thicken. At first I thought it was just the weight of the moment. After all, Burns' words had a way of stirring the soul. But something felt off. The warmth from the fire dimmed, and a cold breeze slipped through the cracks in the windows. The bagpipes, once full of life, started to sound different, faint, distorted, like a mournful wail drifting in from another time. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some fidgeting, others whispering in Gaelic. That's when I saw it, at the edge of the room, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. It stretched unnaturally long, and as it moved closer I could swear it took on a shape, a form not quite human, not quite real. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the dim lighting, the whiskey clouding my mind. But deep down I knew I had awakened something. By midnight the atmosphere had shifted completely. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, suffocating. Guests were whispering nervously, claiming to see things, hear things. Whispers in the air that shouldn't be there, faces in the corners of their vision. I laughed it off, but the laughter felt hollow in my chest. My eyes darted from one guest to another, each of them more uneasy than the last. Then one of them disappeared. It happened in the blink of an eye. One moment they were sitting in their seat, the next, gone. There was no scream, no sound, just an empty chair and a sense that something, or someone, was missing. Panic began to ripple through the hall. People started to move toward the door, but it wasn't just fear driving them. It was something more primal, something deeper. And that's when I realized this wasn't a joke, and it wasn't my mind playing tricks. The poem, the spirit, it was real. By now the guests were no longer just nervous. They were terrified, and I was too, though I refused to admit it. The village elder, a woman I'd spoken to earlier in the night, spoke in trembling words. The spirit of the betrayed poet has been unleashed. It seeks retribution for a long-forgotten crime. I didn't want to believe it, but the signs were everywhere. The shadows in the corners of the room were darker now, stretching impossibly long. The guests' eyes were wide, glassy, like they were staring into something far beyond this world. And then it appeared. The spirit took form as a shadowy figure, half-formed, constantly shifting like smoke. It moved through the room, whispering my name, twisting its face into shapes I recognized. My ex, my parents, my own reflection. Each image tortured me, reminding me of my past failures, my guilt over a relationship I had ruined. The spirit fed on that fear, my fear. I could feel it pulling me deeper into madness, but the more I resisted, the stronger it became. It was as if the spirit was speaking directly through me, forcing me to confront my darkest secrets. By the time the room was in full chaos, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let it take everyone. But the more I tried to fight back, the more the spirit twisted the reality around me. The walls closed in, the room spun, and the guests, once human, now looked like grotesque figures. The final confrontation happened near the old stone hearth. The floor was littered with debris, shattered glass, overturned chairs, pools of blood that hadn't been there a moment ago. The spirit cornered me, its form shifting between my ex's face and my own reflection. I had no choice. I grabbed the manuscript, ready to destroy it to end the curse. But the spirit's laughter filled the room. You think you can destroy it? The curse was never meant to be broken. With those words, the truth hit me like a slap in the face. The poem was a part of the village's very foundation. It was never meant to be found, and it couldn't be destroyed. In a desperate act, I recited the last lines of the poem one last time. The room fell silent, the spirit's presence vanished. But it wasn't over. As I glanced into a cracked mirror, I saw my reflection. A twisted grin spread across my face, my eyes glowing, a prisoner to the spirit's eternal cycle. The curse was never broken. It only waits, dormant, for the next Burns night, and I'm part of it now. Forever. Did I release something evil? Or did the evil always lie dormant within me? You tell me. Because as I sit here now, I can feel the spirit's cold grip tightening around my soul, and it whispers, "You'll never leave." Naga New Year Serpent's Blessing. I'd heard the whispers about the Naga New Year festival long before I ever set foot in Kohima. Tales of colourful dances, sacred rituals, and blessings bestowed by ancient serpent spirits. It all sounded like magic, like a story waiting to be told. I couldn't wait to experience it for myself, to write about the culture, the vibrant life. But that was before I learned about the spirits lurking beneath the earth. They say they rise during the festival, and I foolishly thought I could be a spectator. I should have left the moment the first drumbeat echoed through the air. I should have turned back, but now it's too late. My name's Arvind. I'm a writer, always chasing new stories, new experiences. So when I heard about the Naga New Year festival in Kohima, I knew it was perfect material. A deep dive into the heart of a culture I barely knew. The moment I arrived, though, something felt wrong. The locals, they wouldn't meet my eyes. Their words were clipped terse when I asked about the festival. "It's a time for honoring the spirits," they'd say, but there was an icy chill in their voices, like they were holding something back. I asked more questions. The answers became more cryptic. Stories of serpent spirits that lived deep beneath the earth, rising once a year at the festival to offer blessings that came at a steep price. I didn't buy it. I was a skeptic, that was, until the first night of the festival. The festival began as dusk fell, and Kohima was transformed. The village hummed with life, torches casting flickering shadows on every face, lanterns swaying in the cool breeze. The scent of incense hung thick in the air, mixing with the damp, earthy smell of the jungle that surrounded the village. The drumming began, deep, rhythmic, like a pulse beating straight through my chest. It wasn't just music. It felt like it was coming from the earth itself. The sound vibrated through my bones. I was swept into the crowd, surrounded by dancers moving in hypnotic patterns. Their faces were hidden behind masks, snake heads, gods with wide, unblinking eyes. The rattling of bones and the clatter of sticks in the air made the whole thing feel like a dream. But then I saw it. A flash of movement, too quick to fully register. It was like something in the shadows was watching me. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the excitement, the overwhelming energy. But as the night wore on, a creeping unease started to crawl under my skin. Something was there, something waiting. As the night deepened, the drumming grew louder, more frantic, the rhythm vibrating in my chest like a beating heart. The crowd, too, was changing, moving like a wave of empty shells. Their eyes blank, dead. I tried to pull away, but the music, it was too powerful, too magnetic. I followed the dancers, unable to resist as they led me into the dense forest that bordered the village. The drums beat in my ears, but the forest was eerily silent. The trees seemed to loom above us, their twisted branches like serpentine limbs, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and slither across the ground. We reached a clearing, and that's when I saw them. Ancient stone statues of serpents coiled and frozen in time, their eyes gleaming red like rubies in the firelight. In the center, an altar. The elders began chanting. Their voices were low, guttural, and it felt like the air thickened around me. The ground beneath my feet vibrated with their words. The statues of the serpents, I swear they shifted, their eyes glowing brighter. And then in the shadows I saw her, a woman, her hair wild, her robe tattered, her eyes glowing a sickly yellow. The crowd stilled. The drumming stopped. The silence was deafening. She raised her hands, and in an instant the earth split open. The sound was like bones cracking, the very ground beneath me rupturing like a wound long buried. And from that crack it emerged. A serpent. A massive, coiled beast. Its scales shimmered with a grotesque sheen, and its eyes glowed a furious red, locking onto me with a gaze that seemed to burn through my soul. The crowd, now on their knees, began chanting in unison, their hands raised in worship, but there was fear in their eyes. Fear, this wasn't a blessing. It was a demand. And the serpent's eyes, they locked with mine. I couldn't move, I couldn't look away. Its gaze, cold, predatory, pulled me closer. I tried to take a step back, but my legs, they wouldn't listen. The earth itself seemed to draw me toward the altar. Then I heard the woman's voice in my head, her words like a haunting whisper, incomprehensible, but I understood them nonetheless. It is time, the earth must be fed. I struggled, but it was no use. The serpent's gaze was too powerful, too consuming. The earth around me trembled, the air thick with an overwhelming hunger. The woman's chant grew louder, more frantic. The ground seemed to wail in agony. The serpent coiled around the altar, its body vast and suffocating. Its breath, a hot, rancid rush of air, swept over me, and I could feel the weight of its presence crushing my chest. Then, just as suddenly as it had risen, the ground began to close again. The serpent disappeared, swallowed whole by the earth. But it wasn't gone. It was still there, in the air, in the ground beneath me. The hunger had not been sated. I turned to run, but the path was gone. The earth had closed in behind me like it had never existed at all. I woke up in a dimly lit room, the air thick with incense, the distant thrum of drums echoing softly. My body felt heavy, like the weight of the earth was pressing down on me. And then I saw it. A mark burned into my skin. It was shaped like a serpent's fang. I had become part of it. The serpent's blessing wasn't a gift. It was a curse. And now there's no escaping it.